flailing her arms as she attempted to keep her balance. Another time the guards had told him they chased after Arya throughout Wintertown as she herself chased after one of the few stray cats in the town. "I've seen him practice against some of the men and he's very good," Sir Roderick admitted, "but he fights with a thin blade and his style won't work in a crowded battlefield. Besides, no Northman will willingly train the way he teaches." Robb nodded his head and Jon agreed internally. "I think we should train more spearmen and bowmen in this next group. Have a bit more versatility in the guard," Jon said, feeling confident enough in his standing with both Robb and Sir Roderick to voice his opinion. His brother seemed to be mulling something over before a resolute look overcame his face. "If we're to bring in another large group of recruits, then make it one worthwhile. Last time we stuck to the lands within a day's ride of Winterfell. After the feast send men to every village, hold fast, and in within 50 leagues for recruits. Tonight, talk to the commoners who took part in the melee. Give them each a gold coin for their bravery and then an offer to join the Stark Guard. We will move any family to Wintertown, or even Winterfell itself if the wife has any useful skills." Sir Roderick grimaced at the thought of how many new recruits he was going to have to train but nodded his head. "I'll speak to Horlis." It was after the third and final night of the Harvest Feast celebration that Robb had asked Lady Mormont and Lords Marndaly and Karstark to stay another week to discuss the requests they had each made over the previous days. With Lady Catelyn, Winifred, and Maester Lewyn back to join him during these meetings, Jon found himself on the outside. Though it wasn't like he didn't have things to do himself. While ravens flew to every keep in the north, announcing to the small folk the sum of 25 silver stags to the family of any man who joined the Night's Watch, the Stark Guard had ridden throughout the land to bring in new guard recruits and Jon had ridden with them. The men they brought back, when added to the 21 small folk from the melee who agreed to join, gave them 82 new recruits needing to be trained. Sir Roderick still led the group, but Jon walked amongst them giving advice and demonstrating what was being asked of them. If all of them made it through, they would bring the House Guard's number to above what they had been previously. The training yard at Winterfell hadn't seen this amount of activity since King Robert and his giant retinue was there. Just like the last group of recruits, it would take over 6 months before the majority of these men were ready to properly join the House Guard. Though Sir Roderick believed the 3 war veterans who joined would be ready a lot sooner. It was after a hard day of training that Jon had gone into the Godswood and knelt down in front of the Weirwood for prayer, as it had been a few months since he had last done so. However, before he could get his thoughts in order, something jumped out of the water, startling him and making him fall backwards on his ass. Standing before him was the wilderling Osha, who Robb had captured several months ago and had been working in Winterfell's kitchen. She was naked, her body lean and covered with scars. Jon averted his eyes as Ghost came padding over in curiosity. The fact that Ghost wasn't baring his teeth meant Jon had no worries from this woman. Osha shook herself like a dog and Jon felt numerous water droplets land on him. "Sorry, Lord," Osha said, finally noticing him. "Why you looking over there?" "You are naked," Jon pointed out, cheeks flushed. "You never seen a naked woman before?" Osha asked. Jon felt her gaze on him and resisted the urge to meet her eyes. "I have, but it isn't polite to stare." She laughed at him and Jon had to remind himself she was a wilderling. They lived by a different set of rules beyond the wall. For all he knew, during the warmest months of the summer everyone walked around naked up there. The warm walls of Winterfell helped fight off the chill in the air and he imagined it was probably warmer where they stood than it had been north of the wall when she had left those lands. Jon pushed himself off the ground and wiped the dirt off his hands. He noticed the lack of shackles on her feet and had to remind himself that after 6 months of doing her job without causing any issue she had been given her freedom, but she still worked in the kitchens. She had been told that if she decided to leave and seek her fortune elsewhere, her spear would be returned to her, but it would take more than half a year of good behavior before she was allowed to carry a weapon within these walls. Theon told him that Osha and the head cook, Gage, were in some kind of relationship, or as Theon put it, he's stabbing her with his pink sword every night, if you know what I means. "No. Why are you still here?" Jon asked. "Didn't realize this was your private Godswood, Lord." Jon rolled his eyes at her sarcasm. "I mean at Winterfell. Robb has given you your freedom but still you remain. I would have thought you to have left by now." She shrugged her shoulders as she walked to where her discarded clothes lay at the edge of the pool. Don't know anyone and don't know where to go. Sides, I have food and shelter here. John remembered the story of her capture. She had been with several wildlings and 2 members of the Night's Watch. It was rare to see wildlings this far south. They were mostly stopped by the Umbers or the mountain clans, but they had caught deserters of the Watch in the surrounding lands many times. Most tended to stick to the King's Road until they reached the Wolf's Wood, and then tried to use the dense forest to skirt around Winterfell's view. Ghost must have thought their conversation boring, for he went to explore the rest of the Godswood again. One time a squirrel had erroneously wandered its way down from the trees and Ghost had set upon it and killed it with one quick bite, reminding John how dangerous direwolves could be. It had only been the one time, but it seemed like Ghost was hoping another squirrel would be clueless enough to wander down to the ground with a direwolf near. Why come south at all? Why not stay beyond the wall? Osha pulled the rough spun grey dress over her head and down her damp body. Rivulets of water still trailed down her face and neck. Not that John was staring, of course. He wasn't lying, he had seen naked females before, but not one so close. Dark things stir beyond the forest and mountains of the north, she warned ominously, staring at him with a haunted look. A cold that not even fire can warm you from creeps into your bones and the dead walk. John knew she didn't mean the Wolf's Wood and the mountains where the mountain clans lived. She was talking about the forest and the mountains beyond the wall, farther north than any known man had traveled, at least anyone who lived south of the wall. He did not know whether to laugh at the absurdity of the statement or ignore it as the ramblings of a crazy person. The dead walk. John repeated, doubt leaking into his voice. That's why we burn our dead. If you don't, they come back with blue eyes and kill you. That's why I fled south. All the wildlings will try to flee south, that's why Mance is trying to unite them. When John was at Castle Black, he had heard whispers from some of the older men about a king beyond the wall trying to unite the Wilderling clans. He supposed that's who the Mance person was. This Mance probably figures they'll have a better chance getting past the wall united than divided. That's what he said, she said with a nod. I'll get back to the kitchens and leave you to your prayers. She did just that, but John found no peace in the Godswood that night. He couldn't focus on prayer or the old gods. All he kept thinking about was a wave of wildlings swarming the north and the blue-eyed corpses that shambled along behind them. Chapter 18, Ned 6. Ned 6. Ned had to wait until the rebuilding of the now much smaller Rhaenys Hill and its surrounding areas had started before he felt comfortable leaving for Riverrun. The streets were made wider than before and all of them were laid with stone and lined with trees, including the ones that would be home to the poor citizens of the city. Those who had the money built manses and townhouses in the plots of land assigned to them, and it was the same for any who wished to open up a shop to sell their goods or trade. For the majority, who had neither the money nor the means to build homes, the Crown built large multifamily buildings for them to live. Shops were also built that poor tradesmen could pay a monthly amount to the Crown to work out of. Fortunately, gifts had been sent by most of the great houses to help in these trying times: wood and stone from the north, wood from the Stormlands, stone from the Vale, food from the Reach and Riverlands, and money from the Westerlands. All of it was appreciated as it lessened the burden on the Crown and its coffers. Of course, like all things in the world, the buildings went up quickly for the rich and dragged for the poor. Many still lived in tents outside the city wall as the construction was still going strong. There were many ideas Ned had wanted to add to the area but found it impossible given the current circumstances, like sewers and a public bathhouse. Inspired by Winterfell, such things would require a source of water that readily flowed into the area, and it would cost too much money to redirect part of the Blackwater rush, and create the gaps in the walls around the city for the river to flow through. So they both had to be left out of the rebuilding process. But there was one thing he wanted that they were able to put right in the middle, on top of the shortened hill where the Dragon Pit once stood, a Godswood. It was a little over an acre of land filled with growing grass and planted with tree saplings. Not exactly a proper one, like you would find in the north, but for a southern city it would have to do. It would take years before it became anything near what he imagined, but it was a piece of nature in this otherwise stone-filled city. At the same time he was overseeing the start of construction, Ned and Renly were in search of a new commander of the City Watch. After a few days of speaking with various gold cloaks, they had agreed upon promoting Sir Jacelyn Bywater to the position. Jacelyn was tall, lantern-jawed, with deep-set eyes, a prominent brow, and salt and pepper hair. He had an iron hand strapped to his right wrist where he lost his hand during Greyjoy's rebellion. Ned remembered the man being knighted by Robert on Pike for his services. Bywater had been the captain of the Mudgate for a few years, and none of the men he commanded had a bad thing to say. Jacelyn was tasked with replacing the 189 members of the City Watch who had either been sent to take the Black or dismissed from their position and banished from the city. He also had the unenviable task of rooting out any further corruption that existed within the Order. A wandering crow, a man named Yoren that had stopped at Winterfell on several occasions in the past, had come to the city a few weeks after Jacelyn had been promoted to commander. He was in search of new recruits for the Watch and was looking to recruit from the criminals locked in the black cells. Ned had advised Yoren to wait 2 weeks and likely there would be another dozen or two of the City Watch who would be trading their gold cloaks for black. Sure enough, when Yoren left the city in 2 weeks' time he did so with 43 recruits, 14 of whom were former gold cloaks. Robert's pick for the new master of ships, Montford Valerian, had responded to the Raven that he accepted the position and would set sail for King's Landing within a couple of days, and would do so with a portion of the royal fleet that Stannis had sailed to Dragonstone with. Why it was not all of them Ned had not a clue, and Ravens sent demanding answers went unanswered. He would likely have to sail to Dragonstone himself at some point to find out what was going on. However, that would have to wait. While all that was taking place, Ned found himself receiving a raven from Houses Tyrell inquiring into the availability of his two youngest, Bran for a betrothal, and Rickon for a fostering. That was surprising to him, and he wondered what had sparked Lord Tyrell's interest. None of the matches proposed for Bran were of the main branch of House Tyrell, but the potential benefits of aligning the North with the Reach, who produced almost 3 times the food of the Riverlands, could not be understated. While he thought Bran too young for a betrothal and Rickon too young for a fostering, it did not mean he could not start the conversation with House Tyrell. With the rebuilding effort started, the last of the wildfire removed from underneath the city, a new commander of the City Watch in charge, and the vacant spot on the small council filled, Ned had felt the city could handle him being away for a time. With the king's permission he travelled to Riverrun to see his wife, 2 of his children, and his dying good father. He travelled with Sansa, half of the guard he brought with them to King's Landing, and the bravo Jory had managed to find to train Arya, a man named Syrio Forel. Our Lord Stark. You wish your son to be trained in the ways of the water dance of the bravos. Then you have found the best to teach. 9-year Syrio Forel was the first sword to the Sea Lord of Bravos, Syrio had said when Ned had first been introduced to him. My daughter, actually. Not my son. Son, daughter, matters not. When they train, they are all sword. Syrio was an odd man, but he was Braavosi and they all had an odd way about them, at least those that Ned had met in his life. Despite the initial joy of seeing each other again after 6 months apart, Cat was angry with him when he told her who Syrio was and what purpose he had. You would have our daughter wield a sword like a Mormont of Bear Island. Ned said, wanting to remind her that one of the very wards at Winterfell was a young lady being taught to fight with a weapon. It's not ladylike, Ned. Every day I struggle to get her to attend her lessons, to mind her matters, to not dirty the clothes she wears, and she fights me every step of the way. And you want to reward her for this behavior? She has the wolf's blood, Ned had replied, like my sister and brother, and look what happened to them. Lyanna kidnapped by Rhaegar, my brother storming into King's Landing demanding the crown prince's head, and both of them dead. Arya needs to learn to control her wilder urges, and I believe this will help. I will make her a deal, that she will behave herself and attend her other lessons without skipping them or causing a problem, and in return she can be taught to fight with a sword. The minute she misbehaves, the lessons will end. She didn't look convinced and he knew it would take time, perhaps a few months of Arya actually behaving, but she would relent. She already sneaks behind our backs to practice, we both know this. At least now she will do so under the eye of a professional, and she will be using a sword much more practical for one of her size. Arya had been over the moon, and had readily agreed to not only attend her lessons, something she had already been doing as a promise to Jon when he had given her the sword, but to abide by her mother more and mind her manners. She had shown him the blade she called Needle, which amused Ned greatly. It was finely made, not that he expected anything less from Mikken. From what little he was able to understand of Siri O'Forl's explanation of his teaching, there would be a lot of practice in patience and discipline, things he was hoping could help tame his youngest daughter's unruly nature. Ed Muir, though somber, had been a gracious host at Riverrun. Lord Hoster Tully was a shell of the man he had been during the war. He was lucid but his mind was slipping, and he would often confuse who he was speaking to or slip into a memory of the past as if he was living it at that moment. Caitlin's uncle and Lord Hoster's younger brother, Sir Bryndon, came down from the Bloody Gate, where he was the Knight of the Gate for his niece and Cat's sister, Lysa Arryn. Sadly, Lysa herself refused to leave the Eyrie to see her father on his deathbed. Sir Bryndon would not say why, though Ned doubted the man had any idea himself. He had stayed at Riverrun for 6 weeks, during which time Lord Tully passed away. At his funeral Hoster's body was put in a boat and set down the Red Fork by Ned, Ed Muir, Sir Bryndon, Sir Desmond Grull, who had been Riverrun's master-at-arms for several decades, and 2 of Ed Muir's friends, Sir Mark Piper, heir to House Piper of Pink Maiden, and Sir Patrick Mallister, heir to House Mallister of Seaguard. Hoster's armor, shield, hunting horn, and a wooden sword were added to the boat. As part of the funeral custom a flaming arrow is fired to light the sails as the boat travels downriver, and as the heir Ed Muir was supposed to fire the arrow, but he missed 3 times in his grief. Sir Bryndon, seeing this, took the bow from his nephew's hands and succeeded in lighting the sail before the boat disappeared downriver. Soon after it was time for his wife and 2 children to head back to Winterfell, and he had been called back to King's Landing. Word had come from Essos that Daenerys Targaryen was pregnant and Robert's fury at House Targaryen had inflamed at the news. Seeing his wife, Arya, and Rickon had reminded him of Winterfell and how much he missed it and his family, but Ned had a duty to uphold and so returned to King's Landing with his men and Sansa. As he left the castle of his good family, Caitlin reminded him of something he had planned to do while in King's Landing but had slipped his mind with everything else going on, look into the death of his foster father, Jon Arryn. He promised her it would be the first thing he looked into as soon as he was back. Unfortunately the first thing he had done was get into a heated argument with Robert over, of all things, a Targaryen. She is still a child, of age with Robb, Ned said, aghast at being told that Robert had offered a lordship to anyone who killed Daenerys. And that the idea had been backed by Renly, Varys, Pycelle, and Littlefinger. Sir Barristan and the newly appointed Montford Valerian were the only members of the small council who had been against the idea. She's a dragon. The amount of venom put on the word dragon almost shocked Ned. After all these years his friend couldn't let go of his hatred of the Targaryens, the family of his own grandmother. Viserys was already dead, murdered by this Khal Drogo who had wed Daenerys. All that was left was a girl of 15 and the unborn child she carried. Who carries an unborn child within her? Is that what you have become, Robert? The king who murders pregnant women? I will hear no more of it. Robert yelled, face red in anger. The decision has been made and will not be undone. Robert stormed off before Ned could say any more. He wanted to throw the silver hand that was pinned to his doublet in Robert's face and storm back to Winterfell in protest. Instead he went to the training yard and vented his frustration on some of his guards. He then went to the Godswood within the Red Keep and sat beneath the large oak tree that acted as the heart tree. It was there that he prayed to his gods for guidance. He would stay if only to look into what happened to Jon Arryn. He owed the man that much, but afterwards, if Robert would not relent on this issue, he would resign from the post. The day after had been spent seeing if there was a way he could undo Robert's orders, someone he could talk to or something he could do. He spoke with his own men, Veon Poole and Jory Castle, he spoke with Sir Barristan who shared his displeasure, and he even spoke with Renly, though the Master of Law was resolutely on his brother's side. Not seeing a way forward, he instead turned his attention to Jon Arryn's murder. Grand Maester Pycelle was not much help, though Ned suspected the man was upset that the Conclave had sent another much younger Maester to assist the Grand Maester in his duties based on a letter Ned had sent them, though Ned had been hoping for Pycelle being replaced, not given help. For the Grand Maester, there was nothing suspicious about Jon's death, but Ned knew that Pycelle's loyalties lay with Lyons. Pycelle did tell Ned of a book that Jon had requested shortly before he died, and Ned asked that the book be sent to him as well. He asked Jory to look to see if any one of Jon's former servants were still in the city. As he waited for Jory to return with information, he was given the book by one of Pycelle's serving girls, the lineages and histories of the great houses of the 7 kingdoms, with descriptions of many high lords and noble ladies and their children by a Grand Maester Malian. It was a dull read and he had no idea as to why John had been reading it. It took a few days but Jory found 2 of John Arryn's former servants, a stable boy who had joined the city watch and wasn't one of them sent to the wall, and a kitchen girl who had been married to one of Renly's grooms. The kitchen girl said that Lord Arryn had been reading more than was good for him and that he often worried about the frailty of his young son. She also made mention that shortly before he fell ill, Lord Arryn had visited a blacksmith on the Street of Steel. She believes in the company of Robert's grumpier brother, which could only be Stannis. The stable boy, now a watchman, claimed he knew Lord Arryn well. Most of the information he gave was useless to Ned, but he did say that Lord Arryn was fit and healthy for his age, and that he often went for rides with Stannis Baratheon. There is Stannis again, Ned thought. Stannis, who had left King's Landing shortly after Jon Arryn's death with most of the royal fleet and did not respond to any ravens. Did the watchman say where they went on rides to? He asked Jory. He said they visited a brothel. A brothel. The Lord of the Eyrie and Hand of the King visited a brothel with Stannis Baratheon. Jory could only shrug in response, for the idea seemed just as absurd to him as it did to Ned. Which one? He did not know. Likely the guards would. Unfortunately for us, Lady Lysa has brought them all home to the Vale, and probably half of the brothels in the city were destroyed during the explosion. Ned tapped at his chin in thought while Jory stood awaiting orders. Gather some men and tell Hullen to saddle some horses. I will go see this blacksmith. Alan knows the way to the blacksmith, Jory said, as he draped Ned's cloak across his shoulders and clasped it at the throat with the hand's badge of office. Is there any other service I might perform? I supposed you'd best begin visiting whorehouses. Jory grinned. Hard duty, my lord. The men will be eager to help, I'm sure. As Ned made his way to the Street of Steel, he couldn't help but feel there were eyes following his every move. He wondered if those who watched him belonged to Varys, Littlefinger, or Cersei. Perhaps they belonged to all 3. His time spent in King's Landing had taught him that it was impossible to trust anyone not of his own household, and even then he felt he should be wary. Enough gold could get even the tightest of lips to flap. The Street of Steel started at Fishmonger Square, a market set up right inside the River Gate, or the Mudgate as the small folk had taken to calling it. Many of the merchants shouted to him, trying to entice him to their wagons to buy whatever product they were selling. He ignored them all, making his way slowly through the crowd that occupied the market before turning down the Street of Steel. It was a curved road that traveled up Visneur's Hill before passing behind the Great September of Baelor. The higher up one traveled down the road, the more expensive and higher quality of the items. At the bottom of the street the smiths worked at open forges and ironmongers sold old blades and razors from their wagons. Alan led him to a blacksmith that sat near the top of the hill and occupied a huge house of timber and plaster, the bottom floor the forge and shop, and the upper floors where the master blacksmith lived with his family, apprentices, and servants. Ned left his horse with his men outside and entered the shop. The young serving girl who was minding the front of the shop took notice of his finery, and the badge of the hand, and quickly fetched the master. Wine for the hand, the master blacksmith cried to the serving girl as he came out from the back. He introduced himself as Toib Homart and rambled on about the quality of his work and his noble clientele, from a young Loras Tyrell, who folks had started calling the Knight of Flowers, to Renly Baratheon, the king's own brother. He wondered if Ned was looking for a new suit of armor, or perhaps a new sword to wield. While Toibho went on, the serving girl returned with the wine. She poured both Toibho and Ned a goblet full. Ned sipped at his wine and let the man go on as he observed the armor and weapons on display. He could see the quality of the work for himself, and it was some of the finest he had seen. Even better than Mikken, not that he would ever tell the Winterfell blacksmith such a thing. Did you make Lord Arryn a suit of armor? Toibho paused for a long moment and took a big gulp of his wine. The Lord Hand did call upon me, with the king's other brother Stannis, but they did not honor me with their patronage. Ned sat silent and waited to see if the man would divulge more information without prompting. They wanted to see the boy, so I brought them back to the forge. Ned had no idea who this boy was, but he needed to find out. I would like to see the boy as well. Very well, my lord, follow me. Whatever friendliness Toib Homart had when Ned first entered his shop had all but disappeared. Leaving the goblets of half-drank wine, Toib Ho led Ned through the back of the shop and across a small courtyard to a large barn. When he pulled open the door, the heat that blasted Ned in the face made him grimace. It was already too hot down here, he would be sweating through his clothes inside the barn. Journeyman armorers were hard at work hammering iron, each strike filling the barn with its ringing. Bare-chested apprentice boys worked the bellows all round to get more fuel for the fire. Toib Ho called over a tall boy with broad shoulders, and a chest and arms thick with muscles. The boy had thick black hair as dark as ink and sullen blue eyes. He reminded Ned of someone. "Boy, this is the new hand of the king, Lord Stark. This is Gendry. Strong for his age and he works hard. Go on and show the hand the helm you made." Gendry led them over to a workbench where a helm shaped like a bull's head sat. The boy shyly held it out to Ned, who took it and looked it over. It was raw and unpolished but expertly shaped. "This is fine work," Ned complimented. "I would be pleased if you would let me buy it." The boy snatched the helm from Ned's hands, much to the horror of Toib Ho. "It's not for sale. Boy, this is the king's hand. If he wants the helm, you should make a gift of it. He honors you by asking for it." "I made it for me," Gendry said, jutting out his jaw in stubborn defiance. "My apologies, my lord." "No need to apologize," Ned said, waving Toib Ho off. He now knew who Gendry reminded him of. "Gendry, when Lord Arryn came to see you, what did you talk about?" "He asked me questions, is all." "What sort of questions did he ask?" "If I was all right and being treated well, if I liked the work, who my mother was, things like that." "Your mother is?" Ned trailed off. "Died when I was a boy," Gendry said with a shrug. "She worked in an alehouse." Ned nodded his head. The pieces fit together, there was no doubt as to who Gendry's father was. "Go back to your work, lad, I'm sorry to have bothered you." Ned turned and walked back out of the barn, where the heavy warm air of King's Landing felt like a cool breeze compared to the heat he had just dealt with. "Who paid for the boy's apprentice fees?" Mart looked fretful. "No one, my lord. He's such a strong lad and—" The blacksmith trailed off as he saw the look Ned was giving him. It was the look Ned's children called his lord face, when he had to deal with unruly bannermen or other disputes that arose in the north. A lord. He gave no name and wore no sigil. He paid in gold, twice the customary sum, and said he was paying once for the boy and once for my silence. "Describe him." "He was stout, round of shoulder. Not so tall as you. Brown beard with a bit of red in it. He wore a rich cloak and had his hood pulled up the entire time, so I never got a look at his face. I swear. Someone who did not wish to be discovered had brought Gendry here to hide him." Ned could only speculate as to who it was, but he knew the why. "You know who the boy is?" "I'm just a simple armorer, my lord," Mart said, sweat glistening on his brow that had nothing to do with the heat of the forges. "I do not want any trouble." "These are troubled times," Ned said. He glanced back at the barn and frowned. "I will hire the boy." "My lord." Toib Homart's eyebrows were furrowed in confusion. "Even if you won't say who the boy is, I know who he is. And if I know, and Lords Arryn and Baratheon figured it out, then others likely know as well. King's Landing isn't safe for him, and I won't let any harm befall him out of the love I hold for his father. Winterfell needs more armorers, and the boy has talent. He'll finish his apprenticeship there. Write up the contract." Toib Ho looked as if he wanted to protest, but he withered under Ned's glare. As Toib Ho rushed to do as told, Ned walked back through the shop and out to the front. He had only brought 5 men with him today, Alyn, Tobin, Brax, Jax, and Wyl, and wished he had brought more. "Alyn, head to the port and find me a ship heading to White Harbor that has room for a passenger. Tell the captain they'll be richly rewarded. I will be arriving shortly after you." "As you wish, my lord," Alyn said, climbing back onto his horse. "Kyne, I'm going to need your horse." Kyne hesitated, before handing the reins of his horse to Jax. "For the walk back to the keep, to spend how you like," Ned said, handing Kyne a few copper groats. "Thank you, my lord." Alyn and Kyne walked down the street together, one on a horse and the other on foot. Ned went back into the shop and waited for a few moments before Toib Hobart came out with the contract to sign. Ned did so and handed over the gold coins. He asked to have a piece of parchment and to borrow the quill and ink, and wrote a letter to Lord Marndaly while Toib fetched Gendry. Gendry had never ridden a horse before, but Kyne's mount was a gentle horse that caused no problems and Jax was able to lead him. The boy was quiet on his way to the dock, having naught but the clothes he wore and the bull helm he made. Ned explained that Winterfell only had the one armor and he needed more, which is why he hired Gendry. When they arrived, Alyn was waiting in view with the captain of the ship he had found. Ned gave the man a few gold coins, and handed the letter he wrote to Lord Marndaly to Gendry. He told the boy that when he arrived at White Harbour, to inform a guard that he had a letter for Lord Marndaly from Lord Stark, and that Lord Marndaly would get him safely to Winterfell. Back at the Tower of the Hand, he wrote a letter to Cat and Robb telling them about their new blacksmith but made no mention as to who the boy really was. While he waited for Jory and his men to discover the whorehouse, he found out more unsettling news about Stannis Baratheon. Dragonstone hasn't paid any taxes since Stannis left King's Landing, Baelish informed Ned in his solo one night after dinner. In the north, taxes moved from the small folk, to their lord, to Winterfell, to King's Landing. Tax collectors were men who travelled the land and whose sole duty was to go over books and records to make sure everything lined up and collect the owed money. Winterfell paid taxes to King's Landing twice a year. It has only been 7 or 8 months. Perhaps he is just a bit behind. Baelish shook his head, giving Ned his patented little condescending smirk. Ever since Stannis became its lord, Dragonstone's taxes were paid monthly like clockwork, but that stopped over 6 months ago. Normally, I would handle this, but given it's the king's own brother, I thought it might be best to bring it to your attention. Ned rubbed at his temples. I will deal with it. Baelish bowed and left. The next day, Ned had sought out Montford Valerian, who provided him with no information as to what was going on at Dragonstone, why Stannis had abandoned his post and refused to answer any messages, and why over half of the royal fleet was still seemingly under the command of Stannis and not the new master of ships. Just more questions he needed to ask the Lord of Dragonstone. It seemed if he wanted answers, he would have to get them from Stannis himself. So he made plans to travel to Dragonstone to get those answers. He arranged to travel on the Lady Lyanna, a formidable war galley named after his late sister, and would be escorted by 3 other ships. He would be accompanied by 80 of his house guard, leaving the rest in King's Landing with his daughter. The day before he was to set sail, Jory came to him with news. He believed they had found the whorehouse that Jon Arryn and Stannis Baratheon had visited. It was located at the base of Rhaenys Hill and owned by a woman from the Summer Isles named Shatea, Jory explained. Unfortunately, she and most of the whores were killed in the explosion, but her daughter still lives. One of the establishment's more common patrons, who swore he saw Lords Arryn and Baratheon in the brothel shortly before Lord Arryn's death, says she's now working at an alehouse on River Row. It was as good a lead as any. Not wanting to delay, Ned rode down to River Row with Jory and 7 others. He tied up his horse outside and left the 7 others as he went in with Jory. The alehouse was a narrow and dingy place with tables and chairs packed together. Against the far wall was a wooden bar covered in scratches and gouges, as if it had withstood bladed weapons striking it many times. Straw covered the floor and the whole place smelled like fish. There, my lord. Jory pointed to a young Summer Islander, with skin as black as polished jet, and wide dark eyes. She must have been beautiful before the explosion, but Ned could see the thick scarred skin from heavy burns that covered the lower part of her left face, down her neck, and disappeared down the collar of the dress she wore. Likely a large part of her body was covered in healed burns as well. The explosion had taken her mother from her, and robbed her of her beauty. Bring her to me, he told Jory. Ned spotted an empty table in a corner and made toward it as Jory approached the burned woman. After a conversation, she came and sat down across from Ned. Jory stood nearby to make sure they weren't disturbed. Your man says you wish to speak with me, my lord, she asked. She looked miserable, as if the joy of life had been ripped from her, and Ned supposed it had. He wondered how many others in the city were like this. Going through the motions of life in misery because of a series of unfortunate events, starting with the Mad King, to the Kingslayer, to Ned himself for ordering the dragon pit torn down. Thousands dead and hundreds more left scarred in more ways than one. Yes, any help you can provide will be appreciated and rewarded. I will do my best. I was told your mother used to own a brothel, and that the previous hand, Lord Arin, visited it. My mother owned the best brothel in the city, the woman said, a sad smile making its way across her face. In the Summer Isles, those who are skilled at giving pleasure are greatly esteemed. Many highborn had visited us, including the Lord Hand, though he did not come for pleasure. What did he come for? Ned asked. Was it to see someone? He saw Megan. Megan. Does she still live? She does, my lord. She works here as well, though she is not working now. Ned put 5 silver stags on the table. He couldn't help but wonder if this girl was once a prostitute at her mother's brothel. Perhaps there was a point in time where getting a favor from her cost more than 5 stags. Can you take me to her? I'll give you more if you can. She looked at the coins and then at Ned, as if deciding if it was worth the effort. After a moment she swept the coins off the table and into her palm and stood. Follow me. Ned followed after her, and Jory after him. She surprisingly led him up the stairs, which were just as narrow as the building itself. Up they went past the 2nd and 3rd floors to the 4th. It must be where the workers lived. The Summer Island woman, whose name Ned never got, knocked on one of the doors. There was a shuffling sound before the door was opened. In the doorway stood a young girl with light red hair and a powdering of freckles across the bridge of her nose. She too was partially covered in burn scars, robbing her of the beauty she had beforehand. Even her breast, which was exposed, had some scarring. Suckling at the nipple of the exposed breast was a baby girl, no more than a year. The baby already had thick curls of black hair and, from what Ned could see, bright blue eyes. She reminded Ned of Robert's first bastard, a girl he made with a serving girl back in the Vale before the war started, a girl named Maya that Robert used to dote on. This was another bastard of Robert's that Jon Arryn and Stannis Baratheon had visited, but Ned had no idea as to why. Lord Megan said upon seeing him. She gave a stiff bow. Did you come to see her too, Lord? Like the other hand and the king's brother did. The girl was so young Ned did not dare ask her age. She had likely been a virgin. The better brothels could always find a virgin if the purse was fat enough. She pulled the babe away from her teat, which caused it to cry in distress, and held her out for Ned to look at. I named her Barra. She looks so like him, does she not, my lord? She has his nose and his hair. She does, Ned said, brushing his fingers against the baby's hair. Was she harmed? He left the in the explosion part unsaid. No, my lord. We were out for a walk when it happened, getting some turnips for a stew. The flames came at us, but I shielded Barra the best I could, and the gods were kind enough to see her unharmed. Ned imagined that most of this poor girl's back was covered in scarring. She was right that the babe being unharmed was miraculous. Wildfire was not known for sparing any in its path. That's good to hear. Tell him when you see him, my lord, if it pleases you, tell him how beautiful she is. And tell him I've been with no other, I swear. Shatea gave me 6 months after the baby was born, and then that explosion. Ned looked at this young girl who was clearly in love with the king and the bastard babe she held in her arms. There was a reason Jon Arryn and Stannis Baratheon were visiting Robert's bastards in King's Landing, a reason Ned was trying to piece together, and in doing so was likely just increasing the notice on the bastards by those who killed Jon. I've come to help you, if you would accept, Ned said. She looked at him with hopeful eyes, probably thinking he had been sent by Robert himself. I'm to arrange passage for you to the north, where my family rules. You will be put in the service of Steward Leopold Tallheart of Moat Cailin. Neither you nor Barra will want for food or shelter. North. I thought maybe, well, the Red Keep. Ned shook his head with a sad smile. I'm sorry, but the Queen will not allow it. I am the hand of the king, Robert's oldest friend, and I have been tasked with making sure you are taken care of, but it must be done away from the eyes of the Queen. She looked uncertain. King's Landing was all she knew, and even despite everything she still clung to hope that somehow Robert would come see her again, that he would take care of her and his bastard child. The poor girl had no idea that Robert would swear undying love to any women he lay with but forget them by even 4. Take it, the other woman said. My mother is gone, and after everything I am thinking of heading to the Summer Isles. There will be no one here to help you. Tears came to Megan's eyes as she looked at her friend. She gave the tiniest of nods as she brought the baby back to her nipple for it to continue feeding. It will take a few days, but all will be arranged for you. My man, Jory, will see you taken care of until then. Damn you, Robert. Chapter 19, Cersei and Jaime. It's everyone's favorite incestuous twins. Cersei I. Lord Stark's men have been visiting brothels more than usual. The gold cloak standing before her trembled, not from a chill or any physical threat, but simply from the weight of her gaze. Cersei didn't need to raise her voice or draw a blade, she didn't need to. Her power lay in what she could command. With a single word, she could have this man imprisoned, exiled, or drowned in his own filth, and there were thousands in King's Landing who would compete for the privilege of carrying out her will. That was the true measure of power. Not brute strength, not swords or gold, but the ability to command obedience, to mold others to her purpose. And no woman in the Seven Kingdoms held power like Cersei Lannister. She savored it. She reveled in it. Somehow, someway, Jon Arryn had become suspicious of the true parentage of her children and, along with Stannis, that sanctimonious dullard, had started looking into it. They had started asking questions no one should ask, reading too closely, prying into things that had nothing to do with them. She knew to keep herself and her children safe she would have to kill the two men before the secret could get out. However, before she could even think to arrange anything, Jon Arryn had died, and whether his death was natural or not, it had scared Stannis enough that he had run away to Dragonstone. While that would be worrying, the Middle Baratheon brother had sealed himself tight at his island fortress and made no effort to contact anyone in King's Landing about anything, especially the king. She knew this because she read all of the ravens meant for Robert before he did, not that Robert was aware of that. That suited her just fine. Cersei thought her problems were taken care of by some type of divine intervention. She insisted to her oath of a husband that he appoint her father as the hand. No one would dare suggest to her father that his grandchildren were not the children of the king. However, rather than appoint her father to the position, a position he had previously held successfully for a number of years, Robert had brought them on a 2-month journey to the cold and barbaric north just so he could give his boyhood friend the position. Oh, Cersei remembered Ned Stark well, even after the almost 16 years since she last saw him in King's Landing. Everyone said he was an honorable man, but she knew what he really was, a fool. A fool who put his honor above everything else, no matter what it would cost. Men like that didn't last long in King's Landing, they either lost their honor or their lives. She knew it was Stark who cut back the royal budget. She knew it was him that had sent Myrcella and Tommen away from her to some lesser lords to foster. It was Lord Stark who implicated Jaime in the explosion at the Dragon Pit, when it was Stark's idea to tear the damned thing down, and the Mad King who put the wildfire there to begin with. Jaime was a hero for what he had done all those years ago, and they were punishing him. Ever since he had been forced to help rebuild the areas destroyed by the explosion, she had seen Jaime a handful of times as he made his way back to his chambers in the White Tower. He would come trudging back into the Red Keep well into the night, damp with sweat, smelling terrible, and too exhausted to do anything. Even when she managed to sneak into his rooms and undressed in front of him, he showed no interest, preferring the comfort of his bed over the comfort of her embrace. And now, Stark was looking into what Jon Arryn and Stannis Baratheon had previously looked into, the true parentage of her children, the princes and princess of the realm. She knew from Pycelle he had the same book Arryn had been reading before he died. She knew that he had not only visited one of Robert's bastards, but he had gotten the boy on a ship and sent him north to the frozen wasteland the man called home. A potential loose end he thought out of her reach. The visits to the brothels could mean only one thing: they were hunting for the same whore Jon Arryn and Stannis had once visited. Cersei didn't know if the woman or her child still lived, but if they did, she would see them silenced before they were found. She would send her own men into the city, quietly, of course. If she could get ahead of Stark's inquiries, deny him the final pieces of the puzzle, the threat might yet be contained. Yet even if Stark wasn't able to put all the pieces together, there was still Stannis. And if not Stannis, there was always someone else find out, some septon, some squire, some servant with eyes too sharp and a tongue too loose. As long as Robert lived, the danger remained. Which left only one solution: she needed to be rid of the king. With Robert gone, Joffrey would ascend the throne, as was his right, and she would reign as regent, as was hers. Then, and only then, would no one dare question her children's parentage. Circea flicked a silver stag into the palm of the gold cloak before her. He snatched it eagerly, like a dog given a bone. He was a gold cloak who had the same vices as most men, whoring, drinking, and gambling. Men like him had no honor, and that made them useful. She had used those vices to turn him into a source of information. Varys had his little birds, she had little rats desperate for coin. "Keep your eyes on Lord Stark and his men," she said. "Report anything else they do or say. Leave nothing out." "Yes, Your Grace," the man said, bowing so low she thought he might fall on his face. He scurried away from her and her lip curled in disgust as she watched him leave. It was insulting that she needed to consort with people so far below her like this, but it was necessary if she wanted to have any information on what went on in this city. Her father had taught her information was power. Rather, he had taught it to Jaime when her twin was being trained to take over Casterly Rock, and Jaime would often share those lessons with her later in the night, and unlike Jaime she took the lessons to heart. A burst of girlish laughter floated in from the gardens below, drawing her to the window. Down in the Godswood, she spotted Sansa Stark and her silly little friend, giggling and running about with that monstrous beast. Circea narrowed her eyes. Sansa was a project. A sweet, stupid girl raised on stories of gallant knights and noble queens. It had taken only kind words, subtle praise, and a few feigned interests to begin molding her into something useful. She encouraged Sansa to speak with her father about politics, about court affairs, and then she would ask what had been said, under the guise of idle curiosity. The red-headed child was already 14, old enough to bleed, old enough to marry, yet she showed no interest in being involved in decision-making or the events of the realm. So Circea had been suggesting to the girl that they were things of importance, and that she should start talking with her father about such things, and then would ask the girl if she did so and what was discussed. Of course she had to do so when the girl wasn't in the presence of that damned direwolf. The sheer size of the thing was terrifying in and of itself, but the direwolf always placed itself between Sansa and herself, making it all but impossible to talk with the girl. It was as if the beast could detect Circea was using the girl. That Robert allowed such a beast within the same walls as her children angered her. And none of the men she approached to slay the beast, discreetly of course, she couldn't have it reaching anyone's ears she was trying to kill the damn thing, were brave enough to attempt it. Cowards and lickspittles is what she was surrounded by. The next morning, the gold cloak returned, breathless and sweating. Stark's men had found something, what exactly he did not know, but it had been enough for Stark to leave the keep in haste. Circea's heart clenched. The whore. They'd found the whore. Plans needed to be set in motion. The time for patience had ended. Robert had to die. Stark had to be stopped. And her brother needed to be here. "Where is Jaime?" she whispered to herself, more desperate than she dared admit aloud. Jaime. 5 months of hard, thankless labor had worn Jaime Lannister down to the bone. Day after day beneath the scalding sun, hauling stone and timber like a common laborer, had left him in a near-constant state of physical misery. His shoulders ached, his back throbbed, and his hands, famed for their skill with a sword, were now calloused and rough like a farmer. The small folk had laughed at first, of course. A Lion of Lannister working like a mule. It had been the talk of the yard. But the laughter had faded once they'd seen him work. He might have been a disgraced knight in their eyes, but he was stronger than any of them, and far too proud to falter. His muscles had screamed at first, but now they were hard as oak and twice as unyielding. The only real benefit to this cursed punishment. Killing Aerys Targaryen had been Jaime's finest moment as a knight. And also his greatest failure. He had broken his oath, butchered his king, and in doing so had saved hundreds of thousands of lives. But no one saw the salvation, only the betrayal. Honor didn't weep for the innocents. Honor only remembered oaths. Whenever Aerys gave a man to the flames, Queen R'hllor would have a visitor in the night. The day he burned Lord Chestard, after the man had given up his position as Hand, Jaime and Jon d'Arryn had stood at guard outside her bedchamber whilst the king took his pleasure. "You're hurting me," they had heard R'hllor cry through the thick oaken door. "You're hurting me." In some queer way, that had been far worse than Lord Chelsted's screaming. We are sworn to protect her as well, Jaime had finally been driven to say. We are allowed, but not from him. The cowardice of that answer had festered in Jaime's soul ever since. Jaime had only seen Rollo once after that, the morning of the day she left for Dragonstone. And now, all these years later, the ghosts had returned. The wildfire Aes had begun to rupture beneath the city, stirred by Stark's desire to tear down the dragon pit. How could Jaime have known the stuff worsened with age? No one had told him. That wasn't in the Maester's dusty lessons. It was a cruel joke. He had murdered a king to stop the burning of a city, and now, thanks to the Honorable Lord Stark, a quarter of the city had been burned to the ground. Ned Stark. Even now, the name made his jaw clench. The dragon pit had sat a ruin for over a century, and likely would have sat for a century more if it wasn't for Ned Stark. Yet was Stark here amongst the small folk, hauling chiseled stone through the streets and laying it atop each other? Was he helping to carry pieces of lumber upon his shoulders as men far beneath his station told him where to place it? No, he sat in the Tower of the Hand, casting judgment on others, and ignoring his own sins. Jaime stretched his arms out above him and flexed his back in an effort to work out the pain in his lower back. He had worked all morning and would work until sundown, when he'd limp back to the White Tower for whatever cold meal and hard cot awaited him. At least the end was near. A few more weeks and this punishment would be over. There was still a long way to go in construction, but Robert had eased the punishment. A few more weeks and he could return to the Kingsguard. What shocked Jaime most wasn't the punishment itself. It was that Robert Baratheon had actually bothered to deliver one. The drunkard had stumbled into something that resembled kingship for once. Jaime had considered protesting but knew it would be useless. In all his years guarding the man he knew that Robert did not change his mind, only his horse. Worst of all, he endured it under the gaze of Ned Stark. Those cold, judging eyes that had followed him from the Red Keep to the dust and dirt of the labor yard. The same eyes that had judged him all those years ago in the throne room, as Aes's blood pooled beneath Jaime's feet. Jaime. He turned, sweat dripping from his brow, to see Cersei approaching him, Sir Boros Blount and 20 men in the red-colored armor of the personal Lannister guard, half with pikes and the other half with swords, trailing after her. She looked radiant and furious, the way she always did when she was afraid. Jaime hadn't seen much of her since his disgrace began. Since he was temporarily removed from the Kingsguard, there was no reason for him to be guarding her, and he had been too tired for her visits, too exhausted to indulge her in anything but short conversations. "Your Grace," the small folk muttered as they bowed low. Cersei ignored them, as she often did with those she considered below her. Instead she grabbed him by the elbow and led him away from everyone else. "Stark is going to kill my children," she hissed. He laughed. He couldn't help it. No, he had seen firsthand Stark's anger at the killing of Princess Elia and her children. The man might be many things but the type of man to harm a child, he was not. The very idea was absurd. Stark, he scoffed. He'd rather hang himself than harm a child. His blasted honor would not allow it. Cersei stepped closer, her breath hot against his cheek. "He's questioning who their real father is," she whispered. "If he finds out and tells Robert..." A chill knifed down Jaime's spine. Robert would kill her. Maybe the children too. In his wrath, the king wouldn't stop until the bloodline was scrubbed clean. Jaime didn't particularly care for the firstborn of the children that were technically his, not that he ever felt particularly fatherly with any of them. Joffrey had always been arrogant but he was turning crueler the older he got and Cersei was blind to it. Myrcella and Tommen were both sweet children though, and he cared for them as he imagined any uncle would care for their niece and nephew. But Cersei was everything. The one thing he loved above all others. His son, his salvation, his mirror. Her safety was the only thing that truly mattered. She had thought the safety of Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen would give him concern but it was realizing that if Ned Stark did put the piece together, Cersei would surely die, that angered him. "Why is it always Stark?" Jaime muttered. "Always him, at the lowest points in my life, with that goddamned skull and his silent contempt." Tea was at the moment that Jaime spotted him. Riding atop a horse and flanked by 6 of his men was Ned Stark himself. His men wore their silver armor with white cloaks that hung from their shoulders. Stark himself was wearing a simple tunic, not a piece of armor in sight. Here he toiled in the street, when Stark's actions were the ones that triggered the explosion. Jaime's rage boiled over. He turned to one of the Lannister guards and ripped the sword from the man's scabbard. He ignored the noise of surprise from the man. The weight of the steel felt right. "Sir Boros, take the queen to the Red Keep. The rest of you, with me," Jaime Cersei warned. He didn't listen. Fury drove him forward. All but 4 of the red-cloaked guards fell into line behind him, instinct stronger than protocol. He split them into 2 groups, maneuvering through the alleys of King's Landing like a predator circling prey. They intercepted Stark at the intersection. Jaime stepped into the street, sword in hand, 8 men at his back. 8 more closed in behind Stark. "What is the meaning of this, Sir Jaime?" Stark pulled his horse to a stop, brows furrowed. "You're looking into things better left alone," Jaime responded, holding the sword he had taken out to the side. Stark's eyebrows scrunched for a moment in confusion before a look of realization came upon his face. "What do you know of the death of Jon Arryn?" Now it was Jaime's turn to be confused. What did Jon Arryn have to do with anything? This wasn't about the children. He was an old man who died. I'm told that's what happens when you're an old man. Had Cersei misjudged the situation? If Stark was looking into the death of Jon Arryn, what did that have to do with Cersei? Unless his sister had the man killed, which he would not put past her. If she thought she or her children were in danger, his sister would without a doubt have the person who was putting them in danger killed if she could. A lioness protected her cubs after all. Jaime might not have the brains of his brother, but he was able to put the piece together. Jon Arryn must have looked into who was really the father of Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen. Cersei found out and had the man killed for it, and now Stark was looking into Arryn's murder, and in the process was investigating the same thing that had gotten Jon Arryn killed. For Cersei, Stark was harder to get to. He had more men with him than Arryn did and was always surrounded by a few of them. He ate most of his meals in the Tower of the Hand, and the staff of the tower was full of Northerners more loyal to House Stark than a few silver coins. Stark didn't flinch. Jon Arryn was murdered. Jaime's lips curled. He wouldn't be the first fool to die in this city. Jon was honorable. Something you would never understand. There it was. The judgment. The sneer. The unspoken Kingslayer in every word. Who was this man to always judge him so? A wolf had no right to judge a lion. "You know nothing of my honor," Jaime snarled. "Kill his men. Stark is mine." Jaime stomped forward as the Lannister men hesitated for a moment before moving forward to obey his commands. Stark's eyes widened in surprise. "What are you doing, Lannister? Are you mad? Mad like the Mad King?" Ever since hearing of the death of Arthur Dayne at the hand of Ned Stark, Jaime had been eager to pit himself against the Northern Lord. Dayne was the greatest swordsman Jaime had ever seen, and he had died in the Dornish marches to this unassuming man. As the Lannister men continued to close ranks, Stark seemed to understand that Jaime meant business. "Men, to arms," he cried as he pulled his sword from his sheath and raised it high. One of Stark's men, a man with a pudgy face, urged his horse forward in an attempt to run Jaime down. As the man and horse got in closer, Jaime quickly sidestepped the beast and, ducking the swing of the man's sword, swung his own sword into the side of the beast. Metal cut through the hard flesh of the horse before clanging off of the metal armor protecting the man's shin. The horse collapsed to the ground and the man atop it tumbled with it, making him easy pickings for the Lannister men. One of Stark's men, before he could fully comprehend the situation he found himself in, was surrounded on 4 sides by men who tugged at the man and the reins of the horse he sat atop. The man swung his sword wildly but was unable to hit anything but metal plate as he was dragged from his horse. Stark moved to assist, killing one of the Lannister men but was driven off by 2 of the others, while the third struck a killing blow. "He's mine!" Jaime cried, urging the 2 Lannister men to back off as he swung at Stark's horse. Stark blocked the blow and spun his horse around, forcing Jaime to quickly pull back lest he wanted to get slammed into by 900 pounds of muscle. Another of Stark's men broke through the ranks of red armor and circled back around, his sword raised. "No WYL!" Stark yelled. "Away! All of you away!" WYL didn't listen, swinging his sword and catching one of Jaime's men in the face. The man fell and Wyl's sword glistened red with blood, but his victory was short-lived. The heavy blow of a pike caught Wyl in the chest and he tumbled from his saddle. He was quickly set upon and a sword into the gap at his neck ended his life. A rearing horse caught a Lannister man in his helm, crushing both the metal and the man's skull underneath it. Another of Jaime's men was trampled by a horse as it, and its rider, fled the area. The fifth Stark man tried to run but his horse was cut down from under him, and his awkward landing broke his neck. Jaime moved toward Stark again and again the man made his horse spin to give distance but this time the horse slipped and fell. It landed on its side, crushing Stark's leg underneath it. Stark cried out in pain, which continued as the horse scrambled to rise, twisting the man's leg as the foot was still caught in the stirrup. Eventually the foot came free and the horse was up and running roughshod down the street, leaving a heavily wounded Stark laying there. The final Stark man, upon seeing this, tried to ride to the rescue. He killed a pair of Jaime's men before both the rider and the horse were killed by pikes. Jaime stood over Stark and raised his sword. This was not the way he wanted to kill Ned Stark, but he would gladly take it. Then there was a large growl and a scream. The direwolf crashed into one of the Lannister men still standing, drawing Jaime's attention. Although the man was protected well in metal the direwolf's jaws latched onto a gap in the armor between the forearm and upper arm protection on the man's sword hand, its teeth easily puncturing the leather there. There was a loud crunch and with a yank of its head, the direwolf started to rip the lower part of the arm off. Shouts were heard as the northerner who had previously fled on his horse came back, accompanied by more Northmen, as well as a bunch of gold cloaks. In a second Jaime realized he stood here, with no armor to protect him from the direwolf, and that in his anger he had just attacked the hand of the king and his men. This was something neither his father nor his sister would be able to get him out of. So he did the only thing he could think of, he ran. Chapter 20, Tyrion. Tyrion I. The pounding on the door perfectly matched the pounding in Tyrion's head. He slurred to whoever it was to leave him the hell alone. While he was more adept than most at dealing with a hangover, he needed more sleep than the few hours he had gotten in order to deal with them properly. Instead of leaving like he commanded, whoever it was barged into the room. He needed to give a reminder to drunk Tyrion to always lock the door before passing out for the night. Blearily opening his eyes, he could barely make out one of his male cousins, Willem he thought, though he could not be too sure since they all looked the same, long golden hair and tall frames. His cousin walked to the windows and pulled back the heavy curtains, letting in the morning light. "What are you doing?" Tyrion groaned in pain, closing his eyes against the bright light of the morning sun that made his head throb. "Uncle Tywin demands your presence," the cousin he thought was Willem stated. "What is so important that it cannot wait?" A raven arrived in the night from King's Landing. "It concerns cousin Jaime." With effort Tyrion sat up. Had something happened to his brother? With a proper look he was able to see he was right, it was Willem, distinguishable from his twin brother by his more assertive mannerisms. No doubt sent by his father, Uncle Kevan, who rightly realized that Tyrion would not have allowed a servant to wake him and that Martin might have been scared off. "What did the message say?" Tyrion demanded. Willem shook his head, blonde hair swaying with the motion. "I don't know, I wasn't told. I was just told to fetch you immediately. Get me the servants, I'll be along shortly." Willem gave a curt nod and left. Moments later, 2 servants entered his room. Tyrion instructed one to get clothes ready for him, while the other filled a basin with cold water. He plunged his face into it, the shock enough to jolt some life back into his aching body and tired mind. The servant held out a cloth for him, which he accepted. He dried himself off, though the hair that had dipped into the basin was still damp, and allowed himself to be dressed in the red and gold that seemed to be the only colors Lannister tailors recognized. He likely still reeked of wine, but if his father insisted on summoning him at this hour, he would have to tolerate it. Willem was waiting outside his door when Tyrion made his way out of his room 10 minutes later. As soon as Tyrion stepped out into the corridor Willem started walking and Tyrion did his best to fall into step with his cousin's longer strides. His family often forgot he had much shorter legs. "Where is my father?" Tyrion asked. "In his solo with my father." There were few people whose opinion Tywin Lannister respected, and near the top of that list was his younger brother Kevan. It could not have been easy growing up in the shadow of one who loomed as large as Tywin Lannister did, but rather than try to escape his brother's shadow, as their younger brothers did, Kevan had instead built himself up in the shade of it. Like his other uncles, Tijet, who died of the pox 13 years ago, and Gerion, who disappeared while sailing into the smoking sea 7 years ago, Kevan was far kinder to Tyrion than his own father had ever been. When Uncle Tijet had died, Tyrion had wished it had been his father who was taken instead. He wished the same when word had come of Uncle Gerion's disappearance. Neither wish had come true. Tywin Lannister's solo was a large room with a long wooden table in the middle of it. Hanging on the walls were tapestries that had been painstakingly woven to show each of the 7 kingdoms in expert detail. Various chests and shelves were against the wall, as well as a writing desk covered in parchment, quills, and inkwells. Sitting at the head of the long table was Tywin Lannister, his face looking even more sour than normal. Sitting ever dutifully at his right hand was Kevan Lannister. When Tyrion entered, his father's face seemed to sour even more, which he didn't think possible. Uncle Kevan at least gave him a small smile, even if it did nothing to mask the grim look that was on his uncle's face. Willem bowed his head and left the room, having fulfilled his duty. "I can smell the wine on you from here," his father said with a scowl. "Forgive me, father, but I wasn't given any time to properly freshen up," Tyrion said, doing his best to ignore the throbbing headache and keep his voice pleasant. He settled into one of the chairs at the end of the table away from his father. "I was told you received a message in the night about Jaime. Is he well? The gods mock me, giving me one son who lacks even the most basic of common sense and the other." His father didn't finish the sentence, but the look he gave Tyrion was enough for him to understand what was implied. Yes, Tyrion had heard that he was a punishment from the gods for his father's hubris many times. "Your brother," Uncle Kevan said, leaning forward with a frown, "attacked Lord Stark the other day." Tyrion felt his mouth drop open in surprise. He quickly shut it, knowing his father would judge him for such a reaction. Jaime had always been rash, but attacking the hand of the king. That was not rash, that was stupid. "Did he say why he would do such a thing?" Tyrion asked. "The letter is from your sister, who claims ignorance as to his reasoning," his father said, his voice indicating he did not fully believe Cersei's claim of innocence. "Lord Stark is grievously injured, 5 of his men were killed, and your brother has fled King's Landing. 16 of the idiots I left at King's Landing to guard your sister assisted in the attack, 7 of them are dead and the other 9 have been imprisoned. The king has issued a warrant for Jaime's arrest. Likely we'll be receiving a raven from him shortly saying as much." "King Robert will not do anything to Jaime," Tyrion said, wondering if he believed what he said. Jaime was the brother of the queen, the son of the most powerful bannerman, and a member of the Kingsguard. Surely all of that would be enough to spare Jaime, right? Kevin gave a slow shake of his head. "If Lord Stark dies from his wounds, there is no telling what Robert will do. The king loves the man more than his own brothers. Even if Lord Stark survives, attacking the Hand is serious business, especially as a member of the Kingsguard. Jaime will be lucky if he is allowed to take the Black." Tywin slammed his hand on the table at Kevan's words. "I will not let my heir be sent to the wall like a common criminal." The words stung Tyrion, who felt the old bitterness rise in him. Jaime was a member of the Kingsguard and had been since he was 16 years old. He had given up his right to inherit and sire children when he took the White, making Tyrion the heir of Casterly Rock by all rights of succession. He always knew his father had hoped that somehow, some way Jaime would be able to leave the Kingsguard, but to hear him say out loud that he still viewed Jaime as his heir, it hurt more than Tyrion thought it would. "We need to find him, before the king's men do," his father stated. "We can hide Jaime away until this entire situation is resolved. If he survives, Lord Stark will want his vengeance, but despite being a man who loves war, the king is a man who hates turmoil. I'll offer to forgive some of the crown's debt for a pardon. He'll be eager to take it to keep House Lannister happy, and Lord Stark will have no choice but to accept the king's decision." Tyrion didn't think it was going to be as simple as his father thought, but he did not dare to voice that opinion. He licked his lips, dreading the answer to the question he was about to ask. "And what if Lord Stark dies?" His father and Uncle Kevan shared a look, but neither answered the question. Tyrion supposed Uncle Kevan's earlier words were the answer, that the best Jaime could hope for in that situation was to be allowed to join the Night's Watch. I am sending out groups to search for Jaime. No doubt he will be making his way here to Casterly Rock. Others will likely assume the same. It is imperative we get him before anyone else does. Messages will be sent to House Lyden, House Lefford, and House Swift as well. House Lyden was seated at Deep Den, which guarded the path of the Gold Road through the mountains. That would be the fastest route from King's Landing to Casterly Rock. House Lefford was seated as the Golden Tooth, which guarded the path of the River Road through the mountains. They would likely be tasked with sending men to search the Riverlands. House Swift was seated at Cornfield, which sat at the base of the mountains to the south where the Westerlands bordered the Reach. If Jaime wanted to avoid the major roads and the more densely packed Riverlands, traveling through the open land of the northern Reach and around the southern base of the mountain chain would make sense. It seemed his father assumed his vassals would be more loyal to him than the crown, and there was a high chance he was correct. You will be leading one of the search groups down the Gold Road. The men are being arranged. You leave this afternoon. Me? Tyrion wanted to ask, but he held his tongue. His father didn't want his orders questioned, he wanted them followed. If Tyrion couldn't offer any insight into the situation, then anything he had to say would be viewed as useless. So instead he gave a stiff bow. Of course, father. Tyrion made his way out of his father's solar. He would need to have things packed for the trip like extra clothes and wine. Better he bathe now since it might be a few weeks until he has the chance again. A few hours later he found himself in Lannisport at one of his favorite taverns. There he approached a tall and thin man with black hair and black eyes. The man sat at a table, tearing apart a roasted chicken with his bare hands. Tyrion had originally met the man 3 nights ago in this tavern. They had played a few games of dice, all of which Tyrion had lost. He had come back the next 2 nights to challenge the man, and each night he had lost more and more coin. The man was definitely cheating, Tyrion had just never been able to figure out how. He had eventually given up and returned to Casterly Rock to brood over his losses. I see you're putting my money to good use. The man looked up and gave a wolfish smile at the sight of Tyrion. Imp, are you here to lose more money? Tyrion shook his head. No, I've been cheated out of enough gold, thank you. You know proof, the man said. No, wish that I did. I'm here to hire you, Bronn. Bronn's eyebrows raised in surprise. He leaned back in his seat and shoved a chunk of chicken into his mouth. Hire me, he asked around the mouthful of food. In their conversations they had while Tyrion was getting swindled, Bronn had stated he was a sellsword who had been traveling Westeros the past few months looking for work. Tyrion didn't know how the man was with a sword, but he was at least cunning enough to cheat Tyrion, something many a man had tried in this very tavern and none had successfully gotten away with before. My brother has done a foolish thing and is on the run from the law. I am being sent to track him down with 50 men loyal to my father. I want at least 1 man loyal to me. Tyrion looked Bronn over. Or at least 1 loyal to the coin I provide. This isn't an attempt to shake me down cause I cheated, is it? At least you finally admit you cheated. If it was something like that I would just do it, I certainly wouldn't try to trick you beforehand. I am a Lannister of Casterly Rock, do you think anyone here would dare stop me? Bronn acquiesced to that, knowing Tyrion spoke the truth. All right then, as long as the coin's good, consider me hired. The coin is good, my friend. Finish your meal. I'll get one of the serving wenches to draw you a bath. I'd like you to not smell like piss for at least the first few days in my service. Bronn's eyebrows furrowed as he smelled himself. Their party rode east along the Gold Road, driving their horses to the limit each day. Because of his stature, the journey was harder on Tyrion than on the others. Even with the custom saddle he had designed for his short legs, long hours in the saddle left him sore and weary. Both his legs and lower back cried out in pain every time he dismounted. He kept his complaints to himself, at least around most of the men. At night, after the fires were lit and the wine was poured, he aired his grievances to Bronn, away from the ears of all the others. Bronn was different. The sellsword was not sworn to House Lannister. He followed coin, not banners. Tyrion did not care if Bronn respected him, so long as he respected the weight of the gold in his purse. The others were loyal to his father. Men of the Rock, born and bred. Tyrion knew he'd always have to prove himself twice over for half the recognition. They reached Deepden in 10 days. Lord Lydon had sent his own riders east along the Gold Road to see if they could find Jaime first. They were ordered to ride from Deepden to the bridge where the Gold Road crossed over the Blackwater Rush and to wait for 12 days. If Jaime was indeed travelling along the Gold Road, there might already be a chance Lord Lydon's men had found him and were escorting him back now. It had been about 12 days since Jaime fled the capital, though no one knew whether he had gone on foot or horseback. If he walked the whole way, it would take him nearly 3 weeks just to reach the bridge they were riding to. Tyrion's men, on horseback, could cover the distance to the bridge from Deepden in about 10 days. And if it happened to be Lord Lydon's men had not seen Jaime, then Tyrion would arrive at the bridge a few days before they would be heading back to Deepden, and then he and his men could take up the watch. So after a short stop at Deepden to exchange information with Lord Lydon, Tyrion had urged his men onwards again. He spread them out to the north and south, to widen their field of view. If Jaime was half as smart as Tyrion hoped he was, his brother would realize the danger of his situation and would do his best to avoid the road. They rode 9 days before a group of horsemen with the Lydon sigil came riding toward them. Tyrion felt his hopes soar as he saw them. They were riding back a few days early, surely that meant they had found his brother. That meant his brother was safe and he'd be able to chastise him for his stupidity the entire ride back to Casterly Rock. "They've been in a battle," Bronn noted with a low voice, seeing things Tyrion did not. Tyrion felt his hopes drop as he took a good look at the men who approached him. Some of the men leaned forward on their horses, others gingerly held certain body parts. At the back of the group the riders weren't sitting upright in the saddle but rather thrown over the saddle like a sack of potatoes, nothing more than corpses. And not one of them had the golden hair or cocky smirk of his brother. "What happened?" Tyrion demanded when the Lydon men drew closer. "Did you find my brother?" "We did," one of them answered, but he offered no further explanation. "Where is he? Tell me everything." They had camped on the western bank of the bridge, intending to wait for 12 days as ordered. On the 9th evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a ragged figure emerged from the east. The figure was on foot and alone, with clothes ripped and torn, hair matted with grease and dirt. It was Jaime, though they had not recognized him at first. Word spread quickly and the men scrambled to saddle their horses, eager to meet him and help escort him back to the west. Then riders appeared from the north. They wore the colors of House Lolliston, minor bannermen of the Tullys. Their seat, the Tower of the Rush, lay a few miles to the north. It seemed clear they had been watching the bridge, likely knowing it was the swiftest route to Casterly Rock from King's Landing. As Jaime drew near, the Lolliston riders galloped down to intercept him. Jaime tried to run but he didn't make it far. He was surrounded, hundreds of feet from the crossing. Lydon's men rushed to intervene, demanding the release of their liege lord's son into their custody. The rivermen refused. They had orders from the king, demanding Jaime's capture, and that they acted under royal command. Swords were drawn. It was unclear who attacked who first, but the fight was short and vicious. Lydon's men might have prevailed, until a group of Riverland knights, bearing the crests of Blackwood and Deari, returning from a tourney in the Reach, arrived on the bridge. Seeing a skirmish between Westerland's and Riverland's men, they had charged in on their countrymen's side. Outnumbered, Lydon's men were driven back. Several were killed. The rest barely escaped. Jaime fought like a man possessed, killing 3 of the rivermen himself. But a stray horse slammed into him from behind, knocking the sword from his hand and the breath from his lungs. Winded and weaponless, he was quickly overwhelmed. Afterwards, Lydon's men retreated to heal their wounded and rest for the night before riding out the next morning, earlier today, to head back to Deepden to let their lord know of what had transpired. Tyrion pinched the bridge of his nose at the story. Now, not only had his brother attacked the hand of the king, but blood had been shed between the West and the Riverlands over the entire thing. As if the situation was not already a nightmare. His brother was a prisoner of a minor Riverland lord and would likely be turned over to the king shortly. None of this was going the way his father hoped. He wondered how the man would react. "You two," Tyrion said, pointing at 2 of the men he traveled with. "Ride hard for Deepden. This news must be sent to my father at once. The two men turned their horses and kicked the beasts into a gallop. Tyrion watched as they rode off with a sinking feeling in his stomach. To Tywin Lannister, repairing the reputation and legacy of House Lannister had been his goal, and he had viewed Jaime as an extension of that goal, even if Jaime refused to be a part of it. What would his father do to keep this part of his goal alive? Would he defy a king, like he had done all those years ago at the tail end of Robert's rebellion? Chapter 21, Ned 7. Ned 7. Ned dreamed of 7 battle-worn men standing before 3 figures clad in white beneath a lonely tower. He dreamed of blood and death, for only 2 of the 10 walked away from that fateful clash. He dreamed of a dying girl demanding of him a promise in her dying breaths, a promise that he had kept for 16 years. "Promise me, Ned. Promise me." Those words still echoed in his mind as Ned stirred from restless dreams. The first thing he felt was a sharp, searing pain lancing up his right leg. A low groan escaped his lips as he tried to open his eyes, only to be met by a blinding glare that forced them shut again. "My lord." He recognized the voice as Jory's. He struggled to get up, blinking his eyes in an effort to adjust to the brightness around him. Jory was there, his strong hands helping Ned sit up properly, despite the grimace of pain the movements brought him. Eyes finally adjusted, he was able to look around and noticed that he was not in his rooms in the Tower of the Hand, likely because they did not want to carry him up all those stairs. This room was smaller with simple furnishings and a large window that let in the shining sun. On the table next to the bed was a cup of water and a smaller cup of something white. He remembered his horse falling on him and his foot getting caught in the stirrup. He remembered it had happened because the Kingslayer had stopped him in the streets and attacked him and his men. Ned tried to speak but the words caught in his throat. His mouth felt like the Dornish desert. The cup of water was pressed to his lips and he drank as much as he could from it. He pushed at the hands that held the cup, and it was pulled from him as he smacked his lips together. "Wyl?" Ned asked, weakly. "He's dead," Jory answered. "Along with Tomard, Hwood, Porter, and Varley." Ned closed his eyes in grief. They had followed him down here, away from their homes and families, and now they would see neither of those things again. He had dared to hope that with the fall of the Mad King and the quelling of Balon Greyjoy's rebellion, he might be spared the burden of leading men to their deaths. But the gods, it seemed, had other plans. "I arranged to have their bodies brought north by the Silent Sisters." Jory leaned forward and lowered his voice. "I also arranged for Megan and the babe to travel with them." "Thank you," Ned whispered. Men like Jory, who were not only competent but loyal and skilled, were hard to come by. You would be proud of him, Ned thought, remembering his dear friend Martin who had died in the Dornish marches, who he had just watched die in his dreams for the 100th time. Jory nodded his head before straightening up. "The king asked to be alerted as soon as you were awake. Should I send for him?" Ned sighed. Did he want to talk to Robert? No, not really, but he knew it was a conversation that needed to be had. "You can summon the king." Jory nodded and walked to the door of the room. He opened it and talked to someone outside for a few moments before he closed the door again and approached Ned's bedside again. "The Grand Maester left some milk of the poppy, should the pain be too much," Jory said, indicating the bedside table and the small cup of the white liquid that sat there. Ned made to grab the cup but winced at the pain. Jory moved to grab the cup for him but Ned waved him off. He had an injured leg, he was not invalid. Gritting his teeth, he reached over and grabbed milk of the poppy. He brought it to his lips and took a small sip, careful not to overdo it. If he was going to speak with the king he needed his wits about him, he could not afford to be filling his head with clouds. As they waited for the king, Jory filled him in on what had happened. Harwin had been bringing Lady back from their daily foray into the Wolf's Wood when the direwolf had taken off running, something she had never done before. Fearful of what the wolf was going to do, Harwin had given chase as best he could. It was then he had run into Kyne on horseback, who was screaming for the gold cloaks about the attack. Harwin had arrived on the scene of the attack to see Lady ripping the lower arm off of a Lannister man, who ended up dying from the wound, and the Kingslayer running for his life. Lady had then attacked another of the Lannister men, ripping the man's throat open with a powerful bite. At that point the rest of the Lannister men had thrown down their weapons, begging for their lives as the gold cloaks, Harwin, and Kyne arrived. Harwin had managed to get Lady back under control before she killed anyone else, and before the Gold Cloaks viewed her as a threat they needed to kill. They were fortunate enough that the man had built some type of relationship with the direwolf that it listened to his commands. Ned had been rushed back to the Red Keep, where Grand Maester Pycelle and Maester Lenor, the Maester sent by the Citadel to assist Pycelle in his duties, had healed him to the best of their abilities. After the fall, Ned's foot had been facing the wrong way, and the bones in his lower leg had shattered. It would likely be a few months before he would be able to walk again, and even then it would be with the assistance of a cane for several months if he was lucky, for the rest of his life if he was not. Jory, who had stayed behind at the alehouse with Jax to take care of Megan as Ned ordered, had been made aware of the attack the next day. He had left Jax in the alehouse and had quickly made his way to the Red Keep. He had been present when the king had questioned the 9 Lannister men who had surrendered. They all had the same story. They had accompanied the Queen from the Red Keep to visit Sir Jaime as he assisted rebuilding what was once Flea Bottom. The Queen had spoken with Sir Jaime where no one could hear, before the Kingslayer had demanded they follow him. The Queen had appeared to try to warn her brother not to do something, but he had stormed off and the Lannister men followed him without question, and attacked the Hand of the King without question. Those men were currently in the jails beneath the keep and would be sent to the wall for their crimes. And the Kingslayer? Ned asked. A warrant has been issued for his arrest and the word has been sent to every keep and settlement within the kingdom. Ned let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. He had feared that Robert would try to pretend like the entire incident did not happen. Tywin Lannister was a powerful man who thought his family above the laws of the land. He would not be happy to hear of the warrant for his son's arrest. How long have I been out? 13 days, Jory answered. I've had to chase your daughter from your side multiple times every day. She has been neglecting her lessons, amongst other things, in her worry for you. He imagined it must have been frightening for Sansa, to see her father carried back to the keep looking half dead, while her direwolf's muzzle was red with fresh blood. He was grateful he had reliable men in his household who looked after not only himself, but looked after his daughter as well. Jory told him they had dribbled water into his mouth and forced him to swallow small amounts of fruit mashed into paste. Well distant to the pain in his leg, Ned could feel a second pain in his stomach, which was likely hunger. He felt his body and could feel his bones more prominently than he had ever before. If he had remained unconscious any longer he likely would have wasted away. There was a knock on the door. Come in. The door was opened by Sir Barristan, who stepped aside to let Robert enter. His old friend looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept properly in several days. Yet despite that a wide, relieved smile broke out on his face as he looked at Ned, sitting up in his bed. My king, Ned said with a bow of his head, you look like shit. Robert stared at him in shock for a moment before bursting into laughter. If I would have known having a horse falling on you would have given you some humor, I would have dropped one on you years ago. Ned gave his friend a tired smile. Jory offered the chair that sat on the side of the bed to the king, and it groaned in protest as the king's weight settled on it. The smile slipped from Robert's face as he grew more solemn, his brows furrowing and his lips pressing together. I have heard from your men. I have heard from the Lannister men. I have heard from small folk who witnessed the entire thing. I have heard from the Queen. Now I will hear from you. Tell me what happened. Ned relayed what he knew. He and 6 of his men had been riding back to the Red Keep from an alehouse down by River Row. They found their path cut off by the Kingslayer and several Lannister men, while even more Lannister men approached them from behind. What was said? The king asked. Ned hesitated. He had been looking into the death of Jon Arryn the past several weeks, but he had never said anything about it to Robert. How would his friend react to that? Before I answer that, there is something you must know, Robert. The king looked at him expectantly and Ned took a deep breath. That first night you were in Winterfell, Catelyn received a hidden message from her sister, delivered to us by someone within your retinue. Lysa Arryn. She left King's Landing a few days after Jon passed, a few days before I had even decided to make the trip north. How could she have known I was going to travel to Winterfell? Perhaps someone from the Vale joined your retinue on the journey, Your Grace, Jory said. Ned nodded at Jory's words. The king has arrived at Winterfell with almost 200 in his retinue, and he imagined some of them had joined the retinue well after it had left King's Landing. Kat was positive the note was from her sister. In it, Lysa said she suspected that John did not die of natural illness but that he was murdered. And she named the Queen as a suspect. What? Robert demanded, eyes wide with shock and anger. Sabaristan made his own sound of surprise. Robert rose from the chair and began pacing in the small open space in the room. Sabaristan stepped back from the room, so instead he stood in the doorway, while Jory moved against the wall. You received this message almost a year ago, and in that entire time you did nothing to bring this to my attention. Robert was angry, yet it was not the type of anger Ned had seen of him lately, which usually happened when he had been drinking. He would shout until his face was red, commanding this and demanding that, until he got to the point where he could not speak, and then he would storm out of the room. This was a different anger, a more muted anger. What was I to do? Ned asked. Come before you without any evidence and accuse the Queen of murder based only on the accusations of a grieving widow. I told myself, for John's sake, I would look into it and see if there was any truth to it. For John's sake. John was like a father to me too, maybe even more so than you, since I was here with him the final 15 years of his life while you were in the north, Robert said through gritted teeth. Ned dipped his head in agreement. That's true. Robert moved to the window in the room and glared out of it. Ned could only stare at his friend's back, wondering what he was thinking. Both Sabaristan and Jory stood in silence, glancing between the king, Ned, and spots on the walls. After a few minutes Robert turned from the window. What did you find out? It was only recently that I was able to look into it. Between my duties as hand, the dragon pit exploding, and my good father dying, I've not had much time. What I was able to find out was that before his death, John was looking into, well, your bastards. Robert's eyebrows rose in surprise. My bastards. A boy about 15 who was a blacksmith's apprentice, and a babe maybe a year old now, born to a red-headed prostitute, Ned explained, looking at Robert to see if either of them was familiar to him. I sent them both north. You sent them north? Why? Because if looking into them is what got John killed, that meant they could be in danger. Bastards they may be, but they are children and they are yours. Robert's gaze softened. The king sat back down in the chair and rubbed at his face. Why was John looking into my bastards? What about them got him killed, by potentially Cersei of all people? She can be a bit of a bitch, Sabaristan winced at the term, but a murderer. Here Ned offered a shrug. He had not gotten that far yet. Bastards could cause problems as seen in the Blackfyre rebellions, which had torn apart the realm multiple times, but that was usually only if they were legitimized. Cersei could see the older ones like Gendry as a threat, since they were older than Joffrey, and maybe John being aware of them made John a threat as well. It was hard to provide an answer that was not pure speculation at this point. However, unlike Robert, he had no problem seeing the Queen as a murderer. I cannot say. Though I learned another interesting piece of news. Every time John visited one of them, Stannis was with him. If anyone knows John's motives, it would be Stannis. Stannis left King's Landing the same day Lord Arryn died, Sabaristan said, speaking up for the first time. If he was investigating something with Lord Arryn, and then Lord Arryn died, perhaps that explains Stannis' refusal to leave Dragonstone. And what of his refusal to answer the king's summons? Robert demanded. To respond to his own brother when he reaches out to him. To hide away with a secret that cost the life of a man who was like a father to me. Robert scowled as he looked at Ned. You had planned to travel to Dragonstone, didn't you? Was this the reason why? Ned could only nod his head. His ship was to have sailed 14 days ago. He would likely have returned from Dragonstone by now, with the answers he sorely needed. If Stannis won't come here, then I will go to him. Robert said, repeating the words Ned had said when he had decided to travel to Dragonstone. The king turned to look at Sabaristan. As Lord Commander of my Kingsguard, I leave it to you to arrange everything as soon as we're back in Maegor's Holdfast. I want to leave in 1 week's time. Sabaristan nodded his head. Of course, Your Grace. And you, Robert said, turning to look at Jory. Get this man a flagon of wine and a cup. Robert jabbed his finger at Ned, took a moment to think about it, and then held up 2 fingers. Make that 2 cups, the king's throat is parched. And some food, Jory, please. Jory bowed and walked from the room. Sir Barristan stepped aside to let him pass. Ned was not much in the mood for some wine, but he didn't say anything, knowing it was more for Robert than him. "What about your altercation with the Kingslayer?" I asked what he was doing and he told me I was looking into things better left alone. When I asked what he knew about the death of John, he seemed confused, and said he was an old man who died. I said John was murdered, and the Kingslayer said John would not be the first fool murdered in King's Landing. I told him John was noble and honorable, attributes no one would ever accuse him of having. That's when he attacked. Robert listened to his words carefully, a frown making its way onto his face. The Kingslayer attacked you for looking into something, but it wasn't something that had to do with John's death. That's what it sounded like, though I have no idea what he thinks I was looking into. The king's fingers disappeared into his thick beard as he rubbed at his chin in thought. Sir Barristan, as Lord Commander of the King's Guard, has a member ever been stricken from the order? In all of history there have only been 3 ways a member leaves the King's Guard. Death, being sent to the wall, and rebellion, a way which eventually ends in one of the first 2. One of the first 2 will be the fate of the Kingslayer. For his actions he is no longer a member of my King's Guard. Sir Barristan looked almost relieved at the news. Ned knew the man believed in the King's Guard like no other member of the current reiteration of it did. Selmy was probably thinking of who he could get who was honorable and skilled that could replace the Kingslayer. Ned waited to see if Robert was going to say anything else, but he didn't. "And the Queen?" Ned asked, uncertain. "What did she say?" "She said she went to see the Kingslayer because she hadn't seen him in half a year, since he was sentenced to his punishment. That she tried to talk with him about what had been happening in the Red Keep while he was in the city proper, but he was angry. He felt his punishment was unjust and that he blamed you for it, and then he saw you riding back to the keep." Ned processed the words, trying his best to keep his face blank. He did not believe anything Cersei said. "Do you believe her?" Robert slowly shook his head. "That the Kingslayer blames you for his punishment, I can believe. The rest though? I don't know if I can believe that, especially with what you are telling me now." Robert grimaced, gritting his teeth in a gesture Ned had seen his brother Stannis do often. "Damn John for marrying me to that family." Jory returned with a flagon of wine and 2 cups. Robert took them eagerly, pouring a healthy amount into both cups. Ned took a sip of his, glad Jory found one that wasn't so sweet. He felt the wine burn and swirl as it slid into the hollow pit of his stomach, sharp and unsettling after days without food. Robert drank from his cup greedily. "The kitchen will have food shortly, my lord," Jory stated. "Thank you, Jory." Robert pulled the now empty cup from his mouth, droplets running down his chin and into his beard. "I will talk with Cersei again," Robert said. "I will have her kept in Maegor's hold fast while I am gone, and at the same time I will have most of the Lannister men removed from the Red Keep. Rest assured, Ned, I will get to the bottom of this. For you, and for John." While Ned regained some strength being able to eat properly again, he was still too weak to see Robert off when he left for Dragonstone. Not that he could put any weight on his leg to get down to the docks. Robert had a wheelchair built for Ned, to allow him some mobility while his leg continued to heal. Ned used it to travel from his new chambers at the bottom of the Tower of the Hand to the throne room, where he held court in Robert's name, though he had to be carried up and down the steps by some of his stronger men. He wondered how those who came to stand before the king felt seeing Ned being wheeled into the room, with a servant lifting his broken leg to rest it upon a stool, Ned wincing with pain the entire time. After spending the morning holding court, Ned would travel back to his room to rest. There he was joined by Sansa, who would spend her time practicing her needlework as she spoke with him about the gossip she heard in King's Landing. They'd share dinner in that room, often with a few of his guards. Maester Lenal visited with him every evening after dinner to check on his leg and make sure it was healing as it was supposed to. It was 4 days after Robert left that his afternoon was interrupted by 2 men at arms. They were escorted into his room by Jacelyn Bywater, who bowed low upon entering with the 2 men trailing him. "I apologize for the interruption, Lord Hand, but these 2 men have something I believe you will want to hear as soon as possible." Ned frowned because he preferred to keep these types of things solely in the morning, to allow him the rest of the day to rest with his leg up. Still, he had much faith in Jacelyn after giving the man the position as the commander of the Gold Cloaks. "Desmond, please escort Sansa back to her rooms." His daughter looked like she wanted to protest, but she saw the look on his face and thought better of it. Instead, she allowed herself to be walked out by Desmond. With his daughter gone, Ned was able to take a good look at the two men at arms. On their surcoats was a shield of 3 oaken barrels on a field of white. If Ned remembered his houses correctly, that was the shield of House Lolliston, one of the Riverland houses. He couldn't quite remember where the keep of House Lolliston was. "Given Sir Jacelyn has brought you directly to me, you must have important news to share," Ned said. "We do, my lord," one of the men said, bowing slightly. "We have the Kingslayer prisoner at the Tower of the Rush. We have had him for 12 days now." "Why are we just hearing of this?" Ned demanded, sitting up straighter. "We messaged the king as soon as we had him. When he did not respond, we sent him another message. After not hearing after that one, our lord sent us. That messages meant for the king had gone missing was troubling, but Ned had no time to ponder it. Why does he not send the Kingslayer to King's Landing? About 100 men from houses Lannister and Lydon, led by the imp, are camped near the keep. My lord is afraid any attempt to move the Kingslayer will lead to an attack, and we do not have the numbers to face such a number. We were already attacked by Lydon men trying to capture him. We've heard rumors that Tywin Lannister is calling his banners," the other one added, his voice tinged with fear. Tywin Lannister's bannermen had attacked Lord Lolliston's men. Lannister men were camped nearby to make sure the Kingslayer wasn't brought in for judgment. And now Tywin Lannister was potentially calling his banners. The Lion meant to wage a war to free his son rather than let him face the justice he deserved. Ned would have to send a raven to Robert at Dragonstone. The king would need to put this down like he did Greyjoy's rebellion. "Sir Jacelyn, arrange for 100 members of the Gold Cloaks to accompany these two men back to Lord Lolliston. They will escort the Kingslayer back to King's Landing to face justice for his crimes. I will give 30 men of my own personal guard to assist in this endeavor." He would see the Kingslayer face justice. Chapter 22, Tyrion 2 and Robb 6. Tyrion 2. Tyrion had ordered the men he was with, as well as Lord Lydon's men, to cross the Blackwater Rush and to set up camp near enough to the Tower of the Rush that they'd be able to see if Lord Lolliston tried moving Jaime to King's Landing. He was hoping the presence of his men alone would be enough to prevent that from happening, as he didn't know what would happen if they did try moving Jaime and he had to choose whether to order his men to attack or not. He felt that either option he chose in such a situation would be the wrong one. Ravens flew from the keep, and Tyrion had little doubt that Lord Lolliston was reaching out to everyone who could possibly aid him. The riders he sent back to Deep Den must have made good time, because 9 days later a single rider, whose horse appeared near exhaustion, had found their camp. This single rider came with news that had Tyrion wondering what he had gotten himself into. He was to hold camp outside of the Tower of Rush, and that he would be shortly joined by Gregor Clegane and his men. They would be the first of many men to come, for it seemed his father had called the banners. From what Tyrion was told, first his father had written to Lord Lolliston to release Jaime and had been refused. Then he had written to Edmure Tully, the new Lord Paramount of the Trident, and demanded that Edmure command his vassal to release Jaime. His father had been refused again. And so his heavy-handed attempt at diplomacy was over with, and, feeling that the Lannister name was being slighted, Tywin Lannister called his banners for war. And now Tyrion was going to have to play nice with the Mountain, a man whose anger and brutality were known throughout the realm. A man who only one person had any control over, and that was Tywin Lannister. A man whom Tyrion had to tilt his head back just to avoid speaking to the man's crotch. He doubted he would have any sway over what the Mountain did or did not do. More than likely he would be tiptoeing around the giant of a night so as not to fall prey to his temper. A day after being told of the expected arrival of the Mountain, 2 riders raced out of the eastern gate of the Tower of the Rush. They were likely heading toward King's Landing, to make their case before the king, if the man wasn't already on the march in this direction. Tyrion did not know why his father had placed him in such a position, but if he wanted to show he was a worthy heir, he needed to do as commanded. The wait for Gregor Clegane was not long, which meant he had likely been heading this way sometime around when Tyrion had been at Deep Den. He came with a little over 200 men, though it was easy to spot the man called the Mountain that rides. He was a few inches short of 8 feet tall, and likely weighed over 400 pounds without his armor. The plate armor he wore was thicker than some shields, and from what Tyrion was told there was a layer of chainmail and a layer of leather underneath. At the man's hip was a great sword and on his back was a shield that was taller than Tyrion was. This was a man that would be difficult to kill even if all the man did was stand still. No sword would be able to penetrate the outer layer of plate. Hell, he doubted even the quarrel of a crossbow could penetrate the mountain's layers of armor to cause any significant damage, at most a bruise if the crossbowman was lucky. Tyrion was positive that if Gregor wanted to kill him the man didn't even need a weapon. One punch from a meaty fist would likely cave Tyrion's skull in, whether the fist was armored or not. Bronn let out a whistle. That's one big fucker. Show some respect. That's the most dangerous fucker in Westeros, Tyrion said. Gregor pulled his horse to a stop in front of Tyrion and clambered down from his monster of a steed. Imp. If any of House Lannister's other vassals had called him that and not something befitting his status, he would have rebuked them. For the behemoth of a man standing in front of him, who was somehow taller off his horse than on it, he found himself charitable enough to make an exception. Sir Gregor, Tyrion replied with a nod of his head. What news do you bring from my father? He set out from Lannisport with over 20,000 men several days ago. 3,000 cavalry should be here in 15 days, the rest of the force about 3 weeks after. 3,000 men would be enough to start a proper siege, which Tyrion suspected was what would be his father's orders. Edmure Tully would not be happy about it, and neither would the king, but between the two of them Tully would likely be quicker to respond. Lord Tully will not be happy when he hears, Tyrion pointed out. That's why your father sent 15,000 men under Lord Brax down the river road. House Tully would view the army moving near river under much bigger threat and likely would not find out about the second army until it was too late. No one would ever accuse Tywin Lannister of being a poor military commander. Fucking hell, he's starting a war, Bronn said. Gregor grinned at that, and Tyrion had to stop himself from shuddering at how sadistic the man looked. 2 of Lord Lolliston's men rode hard for King's Landing a few days ago. I suspect the king will send some men to try to get us to stand down and to bring my brother to the city. I'll take care of any men the king sends. With those words, the mountain climbed back onto his horse and led his men farther east, past the camp Tyrion and his men had made, likely to set up a second camp. On the plus side, Tyrion likely would not be having too much interaction with Sir Gregor. On the downside, the man was likely going to murder whichever men the king sent this way, causing this to escalate even more. If you want me to fight a war, my pay goes up, Bronn said as they watched the mountain's men ride by. Stick with me, Bronn, and you'll have your gold and more. More, eh? What's more than gold? Serve me loyally and I'll grant you a keep of your own. A Lannister always pays their debt. If war was indeed starting, Tyrion wished it would hurry up already. Sitting stationary at a camp was one of the most boring things Tyrion had ever done in his life. There were no books to read and no horse to lay with, and the nearby villages were too small to provide either. He kept his men from wandering into the villages and causing problems, and tried to do the same with the mountain's men, though with mixed results. Their scouts detected men from a few riverland houses coming from the north. The first group was about 150 men from House Shawnee of the Stony September, who had apparently seen the mountain from a distance and turned around and rode back the way they came, not that Tyrion blamed them. Another group of 30 men was detected coming from the northeast, but they were intercepted by a rider and changed course to head west. Tyrion suspected they were joining up with the first group. The mountain didn't seem concerned with these groups, and Tyrion figured if those Riverland men did not get a large enough number to attack soon they would miss their chance once his father's men started arriving. And miss their chance they did, as 15 days after the mountain arrived, scouts saw 2 non-Riverland groups approaching them. From the west came the 3,000 cavalry sent ahead by his father and led by Sir Adam Marbrand. From the east, marched a small column of gold cloaks, with men in silver armor, who flew the Stark direwolf, riding behind them. Tyrion had no chance to even process the arrival of the gold cloaks when the mountain and his men made their move. Whatever hopes of resolving this without bloodshed was ruined the moment the first arrow flew as the mountain sprung his ambush. He could only watch from afar as Clegane cut through gold cloaks as if they were butter. The Stark men were on horses and better trained. They put up more of a fight, but in the end their forces were overwhelmed and they fled in all directions. Clegane's men hunted down as many as they could, but some of the Gold Cloaks and Stark men were able to flee from the battle, maybe 18 to 25 total if Tyrion had to guess. Sir Marbrand had ridden up next to him and watched the end of the ambush with a blank face. After several minutes of standing next to the man on his horse, Tyrion turned to the copper-haired knight, craning his neck to look at the man. "Sir Marbrand, it is good to see you again," Tyrion said, choosing not to acknowledge the ambush they had both just witnessed. "And you as well, Lord Tyrion. I have news from your father." Tyrion could not hide the grimace at those words. Sir Marbrand dismounted his horse before reaching into his left gauntlet and pulling out a rolled-up piece of parchment. He handed it to Tyrion, who opened it already knowing what it would say. "My father wants us to start a siege on the Tower of the Rush," Tyrion said as he looked over the words. He made eye contact with Sir Marbrand. "Likely a short siege." Sir Marbrand did not respond, and instead went back to his men and started giving instructions to his men to form a perimeter around the Lolliston Keep, just out of the range of any bowman. Tyrion hoped that Lord Lolliston would come to his senses and release Jaime soon. No doubt the Riverland Lord was hoping his fellow Riverlanders, or even the king, would come to his aid, but the chances of that happening were less and less every day. The 17,000 men his father commanded marched down the Gold Road. Tyrion doubted his father would spare any person in that keep if he had to take it by force to get his son. Rob 6. After the harvest feast had ended, Rob had spent a few days talking with Lady Mormont and Lords Karstark and Marndaly, to work out the requests each of them had made. With the encouragement of his mother, who told him he needed to not only start acting like the Stark in Winterfell but trust in his own instincts, and without reaching out to his father, Rob had decided to give House Karstark the 3,000 gold they were seeking to build the small port at the mouth of the Grey. The Karstarks would have 3 years to pay the amount back before interest started getting added. Some of that money was given to Lord Marndaly, whose shipbuilders would build a few trading cogs for the Karstarks. The rest would go toward builders to build the piers and warehouses that would make up the port, as well as the road that would connect it to Carhold. Not to mention they'd need a tavern or two for sailors to feast and lodge at when they docked, and where there were ports there were whores, so a brothel would probably be needed as well. For Lady Mormont, House Marndaly would pay for their shipbuilders to build her house 2 new longships. They would be built outside of Torrens Square and then sailed down the river to Blazewater Bay, and then north from there. Lord Marndaly also promised to find qualified sailors from White Harbour who would move to Bear Island and sail these ships. In order to get House Marndaly to build 2 longships for House Mormont, Rob had granted White Tower to Sir Wendell Marndaly. As was previously pointed out, the land and people already served House Marndaly, so it was not like doing such a thing was actively boosting the strength of the house. Although he had told the Rotund Knight that he expected him to marry and produce heirs so there would be no issue of lordship of the keep in the future. The man was already in his early 30s and took after his father in his weight, so there was some concern, but even with that Rob was sure the man could find a suitable match. It was 9 days after the 3 remaining noble families left Winterfell that they received ill news. His father had been attacked in the capital by Jaime Lannister and had been heavily wounded, and several of the House Guard who had gone to King's Landing with his father were dead. That was shortly followed by a raven with a warrant for Jaime Lannister's arrest. The news had an effect on all of them. Arya was angrier than normal. Jon threw himself into his duties of helping train the House Guard. His mother had wanted to head to King's Landing, but Rob had told her Rickon would not do well down there and she could not leave her youngest without his mother at the moment. He did not know how long she would choose to stay at Winterfell before making the trip to the capital. He himself felt uneasy about the entire situation. He wrote to Steward Tallheart of Moat Cailin and asked how many men he had to guard the southern pass, and the response was that he had maybe 40. That was not nearly enough, and so he wrote to Lords Hornwood and Marndaly, asking them each to supply 100 bowmen to Moat Cailin's defences. Lord Marndaly and his retinue were probably still several days from White Harbour, but he knew Sir Marlon Marndaly had been left as Castellan and would do what needed to be done. He also messaged the more northern of his lords, Karstark, Mormont, Umber, the mountain clans, with the command to start rallying their men. Likely the Ravens would reach Carhold and Bear Island weeks before Lord Karstark and Lady Mormont's retinues did. They'd even reach Last Hearth before the Umbers who had left Winterfell 2 weeks ago. If things went well, the gathering of men would be disbanded as Jaime Lannister faced justice. If the Lannisters caused trouble, Then Lord Carstark and Lady Mormont would be reaching their homes only to turn back around and march back to Winterfell with hundreds at their back. Like every other night after dinner since the ravens about the attack on his father, Robb found himself in his father's solo with Jon and Theon. "We should march south," Theon insisted. "Fully call the banners before it's too late." "That's getting ahead of ourselves," Jon countered. "You're already doing more than enough. The northern lands already having their men gathered will cut off weeks from when we'll be able to march should the need arise. It will still take over a month for the Carstarks to get here, even if they have all their men gathered and ready to march. Then another month until even the first of our men reach Moat Cailin. By the time we actually enter the Riverlands, almost 3 months will have passed." Theon was eager for war, to prove himself in battle as their fathers had done, or failed to do in Theon's case, a decade ago. Jon, as he had always been, was more level-headed in his advice. So far there was no reason to call the banners properly. Nothing that required them to march south with the full might of the north behind them. Yes, the Kingslayer had attacked his father, but the king had issued a warrant for his arrest and the man would either be executed or sent to the wall. Still, Theon made good points. The north was vast, and even if the northern houses marched with all their men the minute he called for them, it would be months before they made their way out of the neck and into the rest of Westeros. If something did happen, it could be over with by the time the north arrived. Before they could discuss it further, there was a knock on the door. "Enter," Robb called. Maester Luwin walked into the room, holding a folded piece of parchment in his hands. He bobbed his head at the 3 pairs of eyes looking at him. "Pardon, my lord, but we just received a raven from Riverrun. Given the unrest, I thought this shouldn't wait until morning." "You thought right," Robb said, standing up and moving to take the message. He unfurled it and read the words to himself, his brows furrowing at what he saw. "What is it?" Jon asked. "It's from my uncle. Jaime Lannister is held prisoner in the southern Riverlands, but the keep is surrounded by Lannister men. Tywin Lannister has called his banners and is marching on the Riverlands as we speak." The eyebrows of the other 3 went up at his words. Robb turned and looked at Jon and Theon. "Looks like your debate on whether to call the banners or not is no longer needed. Tywin Lannister has made the decision for us. Maester Luwin, let the ravens fly, the north marches to war." Theon grinned at him, while Jon looked worried. Maester Luwin bowed low and rushed from the room. That night Robb was unable to sleep, and despite Winifred's attempt to initiate sex, something he had been more than willing to engage in during the weeks after finding out of her pregnancy, for he found her even more beautiful now that she was carrying his child inside her, he was too far in his thoughts to even get an erection. He was going to be marching to what could very well be the start of another rebellion, this time led by the Lions instead of the Kraken. To some men the thought of going to war would not only not prevent them from getting hard, it would excite them even more. Robb found he was not one of those men. The next morning before they could break their fast, he called everyone to the solar: Winifred, Jon, Theon, Sir Roderick, Maester Luwin, and his mother. He had told Winifred about the raven last night and his decision to call the banners, but his mother and Sir Roderick were still ignorant of it all. "Last night we received a raven from Uncle Edmure," Robb explained, looking at the 2 who did not know. "The Lannisters have called their banners and are marching on the Riverlands." Sir Roderick cursed and tugged at his whiskers while his mother gasped, a hand going to her mouth in shock. "The king won't stand for it," his mother said, her words muffled behind her hand. "After receiving this message, I told Maester Luwin to message our vassals and call the banners." His mother gasped again and looked around the room. Sir Roderick was nodding his head, agreeing with the decision, and it was clear by their lack of reaction that the rest were already aware. "Surely, Robb, you do not speak in earnest. The Lannisters threaten the Riverlands. Not only are they your home, they are ruled by my uncle and your brother. By the old gods and the new, it is my obligation to lend aid to my family. Family, duty, honor. Are those not the words of House Tully?" His lady mother looked away for a moment. "You don't mean to lead the men, do you?" his mother asked. Robb gave a resolute nod. "I am the same age my father was when he called his banners in rebellion against the Mad King. If I call them, I must lead them, or my vassals will consider me weak and never respect me as the Lord of Winterfell." His mother opened her mouth to respond, but he did not give her a chance. Sir Roderick, with the leading members of the House Guard, you are to gather the men around Winterfell and train them, pikes, spears, and bows. We have several weeks until the Karstarks arrive. I expect you to use that time wisely. Jon, you will take over the training of the new guards. If we are to go south, I want Winterfell well protected. Theon, you will lead our hunters in the Wolf's Wood. We will need more meat to feed the men who will soon be gathering outside these walls. Maester Lewin, whatever salves, poultices, and other medicines you can make, we will need lots of it. Winifred, mother, we will need plenty of cloaks and banners, if you could lead the ladies in making them for us. He received a nod in response from them all, except his mother, who stared at him with wide eyes. He looked at her, imploring her to accept his words. She had told him to trust his own instincts, now he needed her to trust his instincts as well. She gave him the smallest of nods, but it was enough for him. He let out a soft sigh of relief. This would be a lot harder if he had to fight his mother every step of the way. He would need to speak with Mikken about making the weapons needed to equip such an army. His father had sent a message a few weeks ago with the news that he had hired a blacksmith apprentice to assist Mikken in his duties. He hoped whoever this apprentice was, they would be arriving shortly. They would need all the help they could get because the North was marching to war. Chapter 23, Ned 8. Ned 8. He watched from his window as Alyn led 29 more of his men in their silver armor and white cloaks out of the Red Keep, where they marched behind a column of 80 gold cloaks. At the head of the column were the 2 men of Lord Lolliston on horseback. Combined with the 70 men of the house guard of Lord Lolliston, plus whatever small folk the man had armed, that should be more than enough to cow Tyrion Lannister into not attacking when his brother was moved. "My lord," Jory said, approaching him. "My apologies for not noticing them earlier, but you had 2 messages from Winterfell sitting on your desk in the hand solar." Ned took the 2 pieces of folded parchment with a frown. Ever since he had awoken, everything meant for him had been brought down to this room he occupied at the bottom of the Tower of the Hand, and that included any ravens he had received. These letters must have arrived sometime while he was still unconscious, but there was no telling when exactly they arrived. Opening the first one, he hoped they were nothing urgent. Robb was letting him know of some important decisions he had made as the Stark in Winterfell. He had lent the Karstarks 4,000 gold to build a port at the mouth of the Grey, which would make it the 2nd port in the north, 3rd if you count the one controlled by the Night's Watch at Eastwatch by the sea. It was a good way to increase trade not only for the Karstarks, but also the Umbers, with the last road under construction between the two, and the Boltons, who were closer to Carhold than they were White Harbor. Robb had gotten Wyman Marndale to build and man 2 longships for House Mormont as added security, and had done so by granting the White Tower, a keep that had sat abandoned for 50 years, to Lord Marndale's second son, Sir Wendell. Out of all the abandoned keeps in the north, and there were dozens, White Tower was the most recent one abandoned. The old noble house, House Glass, had gone extinct when Lord Glass, his wife, and his only child had all died of the pox 18 years before Ned was born. It looked like Robb had taken to heart his talks with him about doing what they could to strengthen the north. Between rebuilding the first keep, expanding the glass gardens, and now this, Ned was confident his son would be a strong leader for the north. He opened up the second letter and found that this one must have been older than the first. The first part of it spoke of what his highest vassals brought to Robb during the harvest feast. That both the Mormonts and the Umbers spoke of increasing wilderling raids had him worried. He had so far sent almost 150 men to the wall, along with armor and swords. In the letter his son said that he had offered silver to the family of any man who took the Black, which would send even more to help man the walls, but he wondered if it would be enough. Benjen had told him that the Night's Watch had rumors of a so-called king beyond the wall. It was likely this wilderling king that was the cause of the increase in raids. The wildlings had a pattern where every few hundred years they would unite behind a singular warlord and would grow bold in their attempts to cross the wall to raid the north, and then the Starks would lead an army beyond the wall and send the once united wildlings scattering to the winds. It looked like history was repeating itself again. The second part of the letter brought a smile to his face. "Jory, find Sansa and bring her here, I have news to tell her." While Ned waited for Jory to find his daughter, he wheeled himself over to the desk in the room. The wheeled chair he sat in was meant to be pushed, but Ned had found if he used enough strength he could rotate the wheels and push himself forward or backwards as needed, even turning in one direction or another, though it was tiring and caused his hands to cramp. At his desk he picked up the lineages and histories of the great houses of the 7 kingdoms, with descriptions of many high lords and noble ladies and their children by Grand Maester Malian, and began flipping through the pages again. Why had Jonarin requested this book and had it in his possessions when he passed? He had browsed through it twice already, but nothing had really jumped out at him. Perhaps he wasn't looking at the right thing. Ned flipped to the pages of the Starks and saw the descriptions of his ancestors. Many of them had dark brown or black hair with grey or brown eyes. Some, like most of his own children, took the coloring of their southern mothers, and there were a few with blonde or red hair, as well as blue, green, and hazel eyes. He went backwards in the book, to go to the pages for House Arryn, but found himself stopping upon the pages dedicated to the Baratheons instead. As Ned flipped through those pages, he noticed they had a lot less variance in their children. In fact, he was not able to see any variance for centuries, as all of the children, male and female, had been born with black hair and blue eyes. It mattered not who the mother was. Even Robert's children all shared the traits, Ned thought as he recalled the bastards he had seen, the girl in the Vale when they were teens, and Barra and Gendry in King's Landing. But wait, for not all of Robert's children shared the look. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were all blonde-haired and green-eyed like their mother. Ned flipped back through the pages and double-checked every instance of a Baratheon man marrying a Lannister woman. All of the offspring were born black of hair and blue of eyes, all of them except 3. They aren't Robert's children, Ned whispered in shock, the realization dawning on him. That was what Jon Arryn had found out. That was what had gotten the man murdered. And it made sense why Cersei would want him dead. My lord. Ned looked up to see Jory had arrived with Sansa, and both were looking at him with concerned faces. He closed the book in his hands and placed it back on the desk. He maneuvered the wheeled chair so he was fully facing his daughter and did his best to suppress his feelings at what he had just discovered. We received some wonderful news from Winterfell, Ned said, forcing a smile on his face. It had been wonderful news, but it was now shadowed by the dark secret he had just learned. I am to be a grandfather, and you are to be an aunt. Winifred is pregnant. Sansa squealed in excitement. Oh, how wonderful! How far along is she, did they say? Maester Lewin believed a little over 3 months, closer to 4 now since this was sent shortly after the harvest feast. Sansa started going off about being an aunt and the clothes she would make for her niece or nephew. However, Ned found himself unable to focus on what she was saying. The heir to the throne was not the king's son, and neither were the other 2. Ned drew to his mind the 3 royal children and thought to himself that not only did none of them have the black hair and blue eyes of the Baratheon line, but none of them even looked like Robert. Most of Ned's kids might take after their mother in their coloring, but they at least had parts of him in them. Robb had his long face and mouth, Sansa had his nose and mouth, Bran was said to look like Ned when he was a child, just with the thick auburn hair and blue eyes of a Tully, and while still little more than a toddler, Rickon appeared to have the same nose, ears, and eye shape as Ned. How had he not noticed the lack of resemblance between the king and his supposed children before? Robert was going to kill Cersei when he found out, that was certain. The man might even kill Joffrey in his anger, though Ned would do his best to make sure that did not happen, much as he disliked the haughty teen. He was grateful Myrcella and Tommen were being fostered somewhere else, as it would spare them the king's anger. Father. He blinked and looked at his daughter, who looked hurt that he was not paying attention to a word she was saying. He forced the smile back on his face and cupped his daughter's face in his hand. She was 13 and turning into a beautiful woman. She would be the next of his children married off, and in several years might be a mother of her own. I'm sorry, Ned said. I was just thinking that perhaps it is best to send you back to Winterfell. Have I done something wrong? She asked, looking at him with deep blue eyes that reminded him so much of Catelyn. Ned knew his daughter loved being at King's Landing, she loved the knights and the fashion and the gossip. But knowing what he now knew, he feared for her safety. To be fair, he feared for his own safety as well, but his life paled in comparison to that of his children. He would endure 1,000 dangers as long as she was safe. Not at all, but you have been away from home for over a year now, and you are soon to be an aunt. Go home to be with your family and see your niece or nephew born, and then if you wish to come back, you can join me again. She gave a slight nod and he dropped his hand from her face. You will be going on the next ship heading north, you and Jane. Go tell your friend, and then go to your room and pack. As Sansa left, Jory closed the door behind her and gave Ned a look. What is it, my lord? Something happened in the time it took for me to find your daughter. Ned pointed at the book by Maester Mallion. Open that book and go to the pages on the Baratheons, and tell me what you notice about all those born to House Baratheon. Jory picked up the book and flipped through the pages as instructed. While Jory knew his letters, it was not often he found a use for the skill, so his going was slow. When he got to the Baratheons, he carefully read over the descriptions of each of them. It took him several minutes before he pulled his eyes away from the book and gave Ned a confused look. I am sorry, my lord, but I do not understand. What does it say is the hair and eye color of every Baratheon born in the last 2 centuries? Jory glanced briefly down at the book again. Every child is listed as being black of hair and blue of eyes. Like the 2 bastards of Roberts we saw. Both of them had black hair and blue eyes like the king. And what are the hair and eye colors of the crowned princes and princess? Blonde hair, and Jory's eyes widened, green eyes. Are you suggesting what I think you are? The king's royal children are not his. They look nothing like their father. The only one they resemble is their mother. Ned's own eyes widened as he made another possible connection. Their mother and their uncle the Kingslayer. Not just adultery but incest? Jory asked, his face taking on a queasy look. I cannot fathom such a thing. Perhaps the real father just has weak seed. Ned thought it possible but dismissed the idea. The children were all Lannister, though he supposed it was possible there was another Lannister relation who had fathered the children, but he could not think of one who had been at court during the times of conception for all 3 of the children outside of Jaime Lannister. No, on top of his attack on Ned, the Kingslayer had slept with the Queen, his own sister, behind the king's back, and sired the children the king called his own. Jory, what the Queen has done is treason. The knowledge of which has gotten Jon Arryn killed. Send a man to the docks and find me a ship heading north that leaves tomorrow. I do not care if they are not going to White Harbor, I will pay them enough to do so. Assign 20 of the men as Sansa's personal guard, give Harwin the command. They are to stay with her at all times until she is safely back in Winterfell. I will see to it, Jory said. As the head of his guards left the room, Ned sat there with his thoughts. Robert likely already knew this information, having been told by Stannis, who had been with Jon, as he came to the same conclusion Ned just did. He wondered how Robert had reacted. No doubt there was rage. Probably destroying things in his anger. Then there would be the wine. Robert drank it by the gallon when he was angry. He wondered if Dragonstone had the stock needed to keep up with Robert's thirst. If the king demanded Ned to act before the man arrived back from Dragonstone, Ned wondered if he would have difficulty doing so. He had sent 30 of his men to bring Jaime Lannister to King's Landing, and would be sending another 20 home with Sansa. Taking into account the 5 that had been killed, that left him with 45 guards. Sir Jacelyn Bywater was a loyal man, and Ned knew he would be able to count on the man and a good chunk of the Gold Cloaks who had been promoted or given a spot in the City Watch due to Ned's purge of corruption. He suspected not all of the City Watch would be loyal to Bywater. Likely there would be some who were loyal to others like the Queen and Littlefinger, whose influence in King's Landing stretched farther and dug in deeper than Ned's own. The Lannister men were outside of the Red Keep and would likely be too late to react to the arrest of Cersei. That left the 3 members of the King's Guard still in the capital, Barristan, Greenfield, and more. Out of them Ned knew he could count on Sir Barristan, and that was enough for him. Unfortunately for Ned, he was not left to his thoughts for long. A teenage servant stood at the door, one of those who worked in the rookery. He recognized the servant from all the messages the lad had dropped off throughout his time as Hand. Raven from Dragonstone, Lord. It seemed his thoughts had summoned word from the king. Bring it here, Ned said, waving the teen into the room. Another message for him to read. The last 2 had brought good news. He wondered what this one would bring. What news was Robert sharing, or orders was the king issuing? If Ned was a betting man, he'd guess it would be the seizing of the Queen and Crowned Prince. Ned unfolded the message and read the words with growing horror. He looked at the servant, who stood there staring at him with raised eyebrows. Get Sir Barristan here at once, Ned barked. The servant scrambled from the room. Ned pinched the bridge of his nose and took deep breaths. He felt like getting up and pacing, but he still could not put any weight on his leg. He would likely be in the wheelchair for another few weeks. Instead he just sat there, as it was all he could do, flexing his fingers as he took in one deep breath after another. He had no idea how long he sat there until Sir Barristan walked into the room. "My Lord Hand, you summoned me." Ned held out the message he had received from Dragonstone. Sir Barristan's face took on a perplexed look as he read it. "How can that be? It takes a little over a day, maybe 3 tops if the winds are unfavorable. It's been a se'night." "I do not know, sir. All I know is that the king's ship has not made it to Dragonstone." Sansa was not able to head back home the next day or for several days after, because every ship in port was commanded to search every inch of Blackwater Bay until the king's ship was found. Ravens were sent to every coastal town and keep along the bay to see if any of them had seen anything. The Lady Lyanna was a galley, a massive ship with a seasoned crew of sailors, and the skies were calm. There was no way it would run aground on a shore, not unless everyone on the ship was drunk, which he would not have been shocked to hear given how much Robert liked drinking with others. Hell, Ned would not put it past Robert to tell the boat's captain to sail past Dragonstone to the pleasure houses of Lies, so he could drink and whore himself to death and leave Ned behind to deal with the entire mess that was the Seven Kingdoms. As if the king missing was not bad enough, Ned had received more ill news. Lord Lolliston's keep was under siege by Lannister men. Those he had sent to bring the Kingslayer to King's Landing for justice had been killed by the Mountain, including 30 of his own men. Tywin Lannister had raised 2 hosts that were marching on the Riverlands. Edmure Tully was calling his own banners. War was about to erupt in Westeros and the king was not around to put a stop to it. And to top it all off, a raven from Winterfell let him know that Robb was calling the banners as well to march to his uncle's aid. It would take his son nearly 4 months to bring his host down from the north and into the Riverlands, and the whole realm might burn before then. Ned wanted to tell him to stand down, to stay in the north where it was safe, but how could he? If their roles had been reversed, Ned knew he would have done the same. The Lannisters were attacking his wife's kin. No man of honor could sit idle. And what right did he have to chastise his son for following the very path he himself would have taken? For now, he kept Robb's intentions secret. The seal on the letter remained unbroken, a silent assurance that no one else had read its contents. Let the rest of the realm learn of the North's march when it was too late to act against it. Every day Tywin Lannister remained unaware was a day Robb gained the advantage. Ned intended to keep it that way. Speaking of Tywin Lannister, he wrote a letter demanding the man disband his armies at once or become a fugitive of the crown, just like his son was. At the same time, he had summoned the lords of the Crown Lands, Rosby, Hayford, Hart, Riker, and the knightly houses sworn directly to the Iron Throne, Stokeworth, Chelstead, Largent, Mallory. Combined, they could raise close to 6,000 men. Add in the 1,000 gold cloaks within the city, along with the several hundred hedge knights and sellswords that Sir Jacelyn Bywater would muster from the streets and taverns, and Ned could have a force of more than 7,500 within a fortnight. Lord Shawnee was gathering the forces of the southern Riverlands on the eastern shore of the Blackwater Rush, where the 2 tributaries that converge to form the Blackwater meet. The last message from Lord Shawnee said he had about 4,000 men so far and was expecting to double that number in a few weeks, for a total of 8,000. Ned's strategy was simple in theory, though dangerous in practice: converge on the Tower of the Rush from 2 sides. The northern force under Lord Shawnee would march from the Riverlands, while the Crownlander host would come from the east. The timing would be crucial. Riders would have to pass between the armies, coordinating their advance to ensure they arrived together. It was risky, but it had to be done. If Tywin Lannister reached the tower first, unopposed any sizable threat, he would break it open and free his son. Ned had no doubt, because it is exactly what he would have done, were their positions reversed. He needed troops in the field now, not months from now. There was no time to wait for the more distant Crownland houses to muster. No time to wait for Renly Baratheon to stir the Stormlands into arms. Or to hope for something more than just the single message from Stannis, despite the dozen he had previously sent to the man. The worst part of it all was that Ned himself could not lead the Crownlander host. He was stuck in King's Landing, and it was not just because he was a cripple. He was needed to hold the city, to manage the chaos, and to guard against any further betrayal in the court. It unsettled him deeply, handing command to another, placing the fate of his plans in hands not his own. Lord Renfred Ryker was the most senior of the assembled lords, but he had fought for the Mad King during Robert's rebellion. Still, he had been little more than a boy then, and as far as Ned knew, had played no commanding role in the war. He had laid out his orders in clear, unambiguous language. Now all he could do was hope Renfred Ryker would follow them to the letter and not lead thousands to their deaths. Chapter 24, Ned 9. Ned 9. It had only been a few days since the army of the Crown Lands had marched out toward the Tower of the Rush, and the Lannister army they were to clash with, yet already grim news had reached King's Landing from the Riverlands. Lords Piper and Vance, acting on the orders of their liege lord, Edmure Tully, had marched their combined strength, just over 3,500 men, down the river road toward the Golden Tooth. Their aim was simple, to seize the mountain pass and turn the terrain to their advantage, creating a narrow choke point where a larger force could be delayed or broken. It was a sound strategy in theory, one that had served many commanders well in West AOC history. But theory gave way to reality. The Westermen moved faster than expected, and in far greater numbers. Before the Riverlords could advance deep enough into the mountains to secure their flanks, they were set upon by a Lannister host estimated at 15,000 strong. The battle was swift, brutal, and decisive. The smaller army was overwhelmed, their lines shattered before they had a chance to anchor their defenses on the rocky terrain. The cost was devastating, over half their number killed or taken. Lord Vance fell in the fighting, and the tattered remnants of his household fled east to Wayfarer's Rest under the command of his heir, now Lord. Lord Piper managed to keep what was left of his men together and withdrew in better order, pushing past Wayfarer's Rest to link up with reinforcements coming out of Riverrun, Stonehenge, and Raventree Hall. Faced with the sudden collapse of his forward screen, Edmure Tully abandoned plans for an offensive and pulled his growing host, now numbering roughly 9,500, back to Riverrun. There, beneath the walls of his ancestral seat, he began to consolidate and wait for further levies from Seaguard, Pink Maiden, Daeari, and the twins to arrive. Ned didn't think his good brother had what it took to stand up to Tywin Lannister or the other experienced commanders of the Westerlands. In his mind, it was already too late for caution. His good brother had made a critical miscalculation. He had sent Piper and Vance forward too soon, without adequate support, all in an effort to shield the small folk and villages dotting the river road. Ned understood the instinct: to protect one's people was the first duty of a lord, but war required cold pragmatism. Sacrifices had to be made, and hard choices were part of command. Edmure should have waited. He should have let the enemy take what they would and drawn his banners together at Riverrun, fielding a unified army capable of standing against the Westermen. Ned had learned that lesson long ago, during the rebellion. He, too, had wrestled with the urge to shield every town, every farmer's field, and every family between Winterfell and King's Landing. But war was unforgiving. You didn't win battles with good intentions. You won them with planning, with steel, and with sacrifice. Victory meant making the hard calls, choosing which roads to defend and which to abandon, which lives to risk, and which to mourn. Now Edmure was reacting, not leading. Tywin Lannister had moved first, and in war, the one who struck first often seized the initiative. If Edmure had begun raising his banners the moment Tywin did, perhaps the Piper and Vance men would have had time to advance deeper into the pass and entrench. Perhaps the outcome would have been different. But that chance had passed. The Riverlands were aflame, and Westeros was no longer at peace. Ned could no longer afford to act as the cautious, compromising hand he had tried to be these past months. The man he needed to be now was not the king's counselor, but the general he had once been, the man who had helped lead the rebellion to victory against the Mad King. That man had made hard choices, buried friends, and pressed on for the sake of the realm. Lord Renly, you will call your banners. I have already sent a raven to the Vale for Lysa Arryn to call hers. The Vale shall march down the High Road and the River Road, while the Stormlands will march up the King's Road and then down the Gold Road. If Tywin Lannister wants to raise his armies in rebellion against the king, then he shall meet the armies of the Seven Kingdoms as Balon Greyjoy did 10 years ago. Of course, I will do what I can to assist the realm, Renly said, bowing his head with a confident look upon his face. Ned had a flashback to his youth with Robert sporting the same look before they separated at the Vale, with Ned heading north to rally his father's bannermen and Robert heading south to rally the Stormlands. By the time Renly's forces were passing King's Landing, Ned should be healed enough to accompany, and lead, the Stormland troops. He trusted Yohn Royce to lead the forces of the Vale. Even if Tywin Lannister defeated the Riverland and Crownland forces that were marching against him, stormed the Tower of the Rush, freed his son, marched his entire army back to Casterly Rock and bent the knee in submission again, Ned would not let his actions go unpunished. Tywin Lannister would be deposed and either executed or sent to the Night's Watch, the same for Jaime Lannister and every lord who supported Tywin in his treason. The real issue was how he was going to deal with Cersei. Robert confining her to Maegor's Holdfast had kept her rather limited, but Ned knew it wasn't going to last. He knew of her pride in her family, and there was no way she'd allow them to get rid of her father and brother without raising hell. If she wasn't the queen, he wouldn't care, but she was. That was why they needed the king. Lord Valerian, has the search turned up anything? Being the master of ships, and being the king had gone missing in Blackwater Bay, Montford Valerian was the one leading the search efforts. The royal fleet under the Lord of Driftmark's command sailed up and down the coasts, and back and forth across the open sea between King's Landing and Dragonstone. Many trade ships had been temporarily conscripted into the fleet to help with the search, and incoming trade had been slowed to a crawl, likely costing the economy tens of thousands in coin. There has been debris in the water spotted by several of the ships. It is definitely from a ship, we just don't know if it is from one ship or many, and what ships it could be. Some of the captains have remarked many of the pieces of wood found floating have burn marks. Burn marks? There hadn't been any reports of pirates in the bay, and it seemed unlikely any pirate or raider would be able to overcome the giant galley that was the Lady Lyanna. If any ship had been attacked and then set ablaze by its attackers, it was either a trading cog or a fishing sloop. Keep looking until something definite is found. Lord Varys, have you heard anything? Ned asked. My little birds have no news on the king, Varys said, bowing his head. His voice had a sad tinge to it, as if he was on the brink of tears and might start crying at any moment. Ned thought it all an act. He doubted the man known as the Spider cared at all whether Robert lived or not. It has been 3 days since news came that the king's ship was missing, and 10 days since he set sail, Baelish pointed out, implying what they were all likely thinking, that the king was dead. Until we have evidence suggesting the king is dead, we shall act as if he is still with us, Ned stated, hard grey eyes staring at each of those who sat around him. Out of all of them, only Sir Barristan seemed upset at the potential death of the king. Even Renly, the man's own brother, did not seem too bothered that his older brother might be dead. Grand Maester Pycelle cleared his throat, and slowly blinked his eyes. The king did leave a recently updated will behind. I'm not suggesting he is dead, Pycelle quickly put in when Ned glared at him, but he named a regent should anything happen to him. It should be stored somewhere in his solar. Perhaps, given his absence, we should declare a regency until he, returns to us. The elderly scholar had a point. Sir Barristan, if you could find that will so we can see who the king would name as regent. We will adjourn until this time tomorrow, unless any of you have anything else you believe should be brought up before the council. Ned looked at each of the men, but they all remained silent. Then you are dismissed. Lord Renly, if you could stay behind for a moment. What do you wish to discuss without the others knowing, my Lord Hand? Renly asked with a smile as he approached. I doubt anything is said in this castle without Varys knowing. That is true. Something anyone who lives here must learn quickly, or suffer the consequences. Ned hummed in agreement. Your niece, Stannis' daughter, what does she look like? Shireen. Renly asked, eyebrows going up. A rather ugly child, and that's not even taking into account the grayscale. She inherited the worst features from both her parents, her father's jaw and her mother's ears. Ned had heard of the poor girl contracting grayscale as a baby, from some doll purchased from an Essozi merchant. That she had been cured at all was a minor miracle. Still, that was not the information he was looking for. What about her hair and eyes? Does she take after her mother? Renly laughed. By the gods, no. She has the Baratheon coloring, black hair and blue eyes. Like myself, Robert, and Stannis, like our father and his father before him. Robert told me that father often said the Baratheon colors run strong, even stronger than the Targaryens, as he was evidence of. But not as strong as the Lannisters. Renly's laughter died and a frown overcame his face. No, I suppose not. The youngest Baratheon brother appeared contemplative for a moment before he shook his head. Why do you ask about Shireen, my lord? Are you interested in a betrothal? I pity the son you match with her. Ned gave a tight smile. I was just curious about Stannis' only child. Are you leaving tonight? He asked, changing the subject. Yes, I'll have my servants and men start packing immediately. I can hopefully get a few hours of riding in before the evening meal. I'll, of course, send out the ravens before I ride. I should have thousands gathered and training outside Bronze Eggett when I arrive. It was a 1-week ride from King's Landing to Bronze Eggett. When Ned had marched down the King's Road to relieve the Tyrell siege of Storm's End, it had taken him 3 weeks to reach the seat of House Buckler. At a minimum it would take a month for Renly to come back with a host, but if it was going to be a host of decent size, at least 20,000, it would likely be 2 to 3 months before Ned saw Renly again. Ned allowed Jory to wheel him toward the room the small council was meeting in. The small council had to meet in one of the spare rooms at the bottom of the Tower of the Hand due to Ned's inability to climb stairs. The room, which was bare outside of the plain wooden table and chairs that had been brought in, was not nearly as opulent as the small council chamber and had a musty smell to it. There was a good chance Robert had named him regent, as it was similar enough to being hand for an indifferent king. If, on the off chance, someone else was named, he would have to make whomever it was aware of what he knew about Cersei and her children. Together he and the regent would present a united front in the arrest of the queen and the royal children. Unless the gods were cruel and Robert had named a Lannister as regent, that is. When he arrived in the room, he found that half of the small council was not there. Renly he knew was on his way to Bronze Eggett to gather the army of the Stormlands. Littlefinger and Montford Valerian were also absent, and their whereabouts Ned did not have a clue. That left him with Grand Maester Pycelle, Lord Varys, and Sir Barristan. Not ideal, but really he only needed Sir Barristan. Where are Lords Valerian and Baelish? Ned asked as Jory pushed him to the head of the table. The others shared looks but none of them had an answer. Ned couldn't wait on the men. If he was going to make his move and arrest Cersei today, he needed to find out who the regent was so he could start the process. His men still in the capital not assigned to protecting Sansa were armed and armored, waiting in the small hall of the Tower of the Hand, maybe a few 100 feet from their current location. Sir Jacelyn Bywater was to gather the gold cloaks loyal to him and have them outside in the outer yard of the Red Keep when the sun was at its zenith in less than an hour. Sir Jacelyn said he would likely be able to gather close to 300 gold cloaks. Ned knew the commander of the gold cloaks was curious as to why he was being asked to gather these men, but he also knew the man would follow orders without having his curiosity satisfied. Should we wait for them? Lord Varys asked. We will proceed without them, Ned instructed. Sir Barristan. I have the king's will, Sir Barristan said, holding up a rolled-up piece of parchment sealed with the royal stamp. As you can see, the seal still remains on it. Let's not sit in suspense, Sir Barristan, Lord Varys said. Break the seal and let us confirm whom most of us suspect was named regent. All 3 of the men looked at Ned at those words. Sir Barristan gave a nod and used a small dirk on his sword belt to carefully break the seal. He unrolled the parchment and read over the words before giving a short nod. King Robert has indeed named Lord Stark regent should anything happen to him. The will was passed to Grand Maester Pycelle, who read it with drooping eyes before passing it to Lord Varys, who gave a small half-giggle as he looked it over. At last it was given to Ned and he confirmed what Sir Barristan had said. Robert had named him regent and tasked him with helping Joffrey become a better man and king than Robert had been. If only his friend knew that his son was not actually his. We all confirm this is the king's signature? Ned asked. All 3 of them agreed and Ned nodded his head. Then I don't believe much else is needed for today. This meeting is adjourned. Sir Barristan, if you'll. Ned found the words dying on his lips as 6 gold cloaks entered the room. Excuse me, my lords, but your presence has been requested in the throne room. By whom? Sir Barristan asked. The king. The eyebrows of Sir Barristan and Grand Maester Pycelle went up at those 2 words. Even Varys seemed surprised, and that man knew almost everything that happened in the Red Keep. Ned knew he should have felt elation at those words, but there was something about these gold cloaks that gave him an uneasy feeling. "Sir Barristan, if you would take possession of this again," Ned said, holding out the will. The white-haired knight took the will and rolled it up again. He placed it in his sword belt and carefully stood from his seat, making sure his sword did not catch on anything. "If you'll allow me a moment," Ned said to the gold cloaks. The men bowed as they left the room with the 3 members of the small council. Ned waited a beat before turning to Jory, who had stepped back against a wall. He waved the head of his guard over. "Jory, I fear something is afoot," Ned murmured. "My lord, is this not good news, that the king has returned?" Jory asked. "Let us pray it is indeed Robert that sits the throne, but let us be ready should that not be the case. Get the men who have gathered in the small hall. Send one of the men to Sansa's quarters, I want her ready to leave at a moment's notice. And tell the man you send to her that there is a letter for Jon in the writing desk in my solar. I would like Sansa to carry it to Winterfell for me, just in case. I will be right back." Being in this chair prevented Ned from carrying a sword around with him, but he still carried a dagger at his waist. His hand drifted to it, feeling the hilt beneath his fingers as he thought about what was happening. Jory was only gone for a minute before he returned to wheel Ned out of the room and to the throne room. All his men were gathered and formed up in rows of 4, except the last that had 3. They fell into step behind Jory and Ned, the clank of their armor as they walked almost in unison. The outer yard was empty of any gathering of gold cloaks, and Ned's unease increased. Perhaps Sir Jacelyn and his loyal men were inside the throne room. That would make sense, especially if Robert had indeed returned. When they entered the throne room, it was not to see Ned's childhood friend sitting the chair, but rather a tall teen with curly blonde hair. Joffrey wore a surcoat, half in the yellow and black of House Baratheon and the other half in the red and gold of House Lannister. On his head was a crown of gold encrusted with rubies and black diamonds. Being limited to Maegor's Holdfast had not limited Cersei as much as he had hoped. It seemed that in the days since Robert's disappearance she had been busy getting everything ready to anoint her son as the new king of Westeros. At Joffrey's side stood his mother, dressed in a multi-layered silk dress in red and gold. Next to her was Sir Preston Greenfield in his white Kingsguard armor. On the other side of the throne was Sandor the Hound Clegane. At the foot of the throne was Littlefinger, which explained why he was not at the small council meeting. The man must have allied himself with Cersei at some point. Maybe it had happened years ago, when Jon Arryn was still in good health, or maybe it had happened in the last few days. It was still something Ned should have foreseen, but there were so many vipers within these walls it was difficult to keep track of them all. Along the walls were a few hundred gold cloaks. Ned looked them each over but recognized none of them, and he could not see Sir Jacelyn anywhere. Had the man betrayed him as well, or had something happened? "If you're looking for Sir Jacelyn and his men," Littlefinger started, seemingly reading Ned's mind, "he's dealing with a riot at Fishmonger's Square." Littlefinger's always present smirk was somehow wider and more sinister looking. Ned felt something in his stomach drop as he realized not only had his maneuvering been discovered, but it appeared he had been outmaneuvered. The gold cloaks that lined the walls were not loyal to him, they were loyal to Littlefinger and Cersei. There was a commotion behind him and he turned to watch as the Lannister men that had been banished from the Red Keep by Robert marched in and guarded the main entrance. Only about 15 of them, but that was more than enough to cause a problem. With a start, Ned realized he had overlooked something in the room. Several feet away from the steps that led up to the throne was a table. On the other side of the table from the throne were Sir Barristan, Grand Maester Pycelle, and Varys, whose bodies partially hid the table from Ned's view. The table was made of thick wood and had something large laying atop it. Whatever it was covered by a white sheet, though that sinking feeling in Ned's stomach told him the thing under the sheet was a body. Chapter 25, Tyrion 3 and Jon 6. Tyrion 3. Only the vanguard of his father's army had arrived when Tyrion was given the orders to storm the keep. The 2,000 infantrymen that flew the Lion of Lannister, amongst several other banners, were led by Sir Lylcra Kehall, a large man known as Strongbow, though even Strongbow paled in comparison to the mountain. Their arrival brought their force surrounding the Tower of the Rush up to 5,300. Word had come that Ned Stark had sent a force of about 6,000 men from King's Landing to break the siege, and Tyrion knew there was a force of several thousand Riverlanders forming to their north. Their scouts and outriders were keeping an eye on that growing force of rivermen, making sure they wouldn't wake up to any surprise attacks. His father wanted the siege over with before either of those forces decided to make a move on them. "How far back is my father?" Tyrion asked, as the news was relayed to him. "About 2 to 3 days," Strongbor stated. "He wants the keep stormed, Sir Jaime free, and then for us to pull back to the other side of the Blackwater." Tyrion nodded his head. With only the one bridge to cross the Blackwater Rush, crossing it and setting up defensive positions would make it idiotic for the King's Landing forces to attack. They'd have to find places to ford either up or down the river, something that would take days to accomplish. Enough time for his father to arrive with the rest of his host. "Let me talk to Lord Lolliston. He'll release Jaime to us once he realizes the hopelessness of his situation. I can have this wrapped up shortly." The Strongbor shook his head, a grim look upon his face. "Your father wants the keep stormed and the Lollistons killed." Tyrion winced. Of course his father wanted the Lolliston family killed. The man had dared to capture a Lannister, even if it was on the king's orders, and for that he had to suffer the consequences. Another reminder of the reigns of Castamaria to any who thought to stand up to House Lannister. "Well then, the ladders have been built. I'd let Sir Gregor lead the charge. I doubt any arrows will be able to fully penetrate his armor." The Mountain did indeed lead the charge. He was the first one on the walls, his armor littered with arrows, making the man look like a giant murderous porcupine. Tyrion would have laughed if not for the seriousness of the situation. There were maybe 100 fighting men within the keep, and of them only 80 were armored properly. The fighting was over within the hour, but the screams of the house servants and members of the Lolliston family lasted a few hours more as the Mountain and his men had their way with them all. As much as he wanted to be there when his brother was freed, Tyrion found he had no stomach for what the Mountain was doing. The sight of a dead man with an open stomach and his guts hanging out was one thing, but what was being done to those people, that was another thing altogether. Instead he went to his tent and did his best to block out the screams. "War is ugly business," Bronn pointed out. "That it is," Tyrion agreed, "but what is happening in that keep is not war." Bronn only shrugged in response. If there was one thing Tyrion learned about the sellsword, it was that he had no morals and was only in it for himself. As long as Tyrion paid him he would have the man's loyalty, but even if they knew each other for decades, as soon as Tyrion's coin ran out so would Bronn's loyalty. Sir Adam Marbrand and Sir Lyle Cakehall arrived at his tent with Jaime in between them. His brother looked a little grimy, as it had likely been a month or so since he last bathed, but otherwise he appeared fine. "We've counted the casualties," Sir Adam said. 43 dead, another 24 wounded. "Your first victory as a commander," Jaime said with his patented smirk. "Congratulations, little brother, I did not think you had it in you. I see not even a few weeks imprisoned can dull your humor, given you're making jests as our men rape and slaughter the people in that keep, and our father wages war against the Riverlands. All because of you." "It's great to see you too," Jaime replied, his smirk dropping as he grabbed the cup of wine Tyrion had poured himself and started drinking it. "Sirs Adam and Lyle, I want men to strip the dead of anything useful and to pile our dead on wagons. We will bury them when we have time. Get others to start packing up camp. They are free to take whatever valuables they want from the keep. We head out to cross the Blackwater in 3 hours." The two knights glanced briefly at Jaime before they bowed and left the tent to do as they were told. Tyrion had to admit there was a certain feeling of power at having such experienced warriors do as he commanded. "Who is this?" Jaime asked, nodding his head at Bronn. "This is Bronn. A sellsword I hired to be my personal sword." "You've barely paid me shit so far," Bronn muttered. Tyrion pulled out a silver stag and flipped it to the sellsword, who easily caught it. "There, a silver stag for you to shut up." Bronn snorted but pocketed the coin and left the tent. Jaime watched him leave with a bemused expression on his face. "You let him speak to you that way? His blunt nature is refreshing, to be honest. I don't have to worry about him telling me what I want to hear just because I'm a Lannister. I also don't have to worry about him caving in my face like the Mountain." Jaime winced and rubbed at the side of his face in a rare showing of uncertainty. I did not expect father to unleash that, man. What are father's plans exactly? Whatever they are, he has not deemed to inform me, though I can take a guess. Jaime indicated for him to do so. He told Edmure Tully to have you released and was rebuffed, so he intends to make the Lord Paramount of the Trident regret such a decision. A force under Lord Brax marches on Riverrun, and I doubt he'll turn around with the army he marches here with. We will march into the Riverlands and burn as much as we can. With Jaime freed, leadership of their host seemed to unanimously transfer to his older brother. Tyrion could do nothing but watch as the men who had turned to him for orders now turned to his brother, and Jaime accepted the position without a second thought. Like most of his life, Tyrion found himself being pushed to the side for one of his siblings. Despite it being Tyrion's orders from earlier, under Jaime they finished ransacking the Tower of the Rush, packed up camp, and marched the several miles to the south, where they crossed the bridge over the Blackwater Rush. The sun was setting when they started setting up their new camp and defenses. Scouts reported the sight of the rest of his father's army on the morning of the third day. It took hours for the thousands of men to arrive, where they began expanding upon the camp and defenses set up. His father marched into the camp with Uncle Kevan at his side. Because he was not a sentimental man, Tywin Lannister had his main tent set up first, a long and arduous process, before calling his sons to him. Tyrion had observed the camp followers who trailed after the army, the blacksmiths, stable hands, cooks, healers, and various other servants. And then there were the whores, who followed at the very back and would try to sneak into the various tents at night to ply their trade. While I am meeting with my father, bring one of the whores to my tent, Tyrion instructed Bronn. Preferably one closer to me in height. Do you want me to see if the mountain is available? Bronn asked. Don't let the man hear you joke about him like that, or you will be the one he's buggering, Tyrion warned. Bronn grimaced at the imagery as he went in search of a whore, and Tyrion went to the main tent. Inside he found his father seated with Uncle Kevan and Jaime to his left and right. Seated around the table were Lord Lewis Lyden, Lord Hayes Swift, Lord Diron Cerrit, Sir Adam Marbrand, Sir Lylcra Kehall, Sir Amory Lorque, and Sir Gregor Clegane. Tyrion saw that there was a spot between Jaime and Sir Adam and so made his way toward it. There is much to discuss, his father said, looking over the men assembled in front of him. Lord Brax has smashed the small host meant to block the river road and rides toward Riverrun. Jaime, you will ride north with some men and take command of the host. Are you sure that is wise, me traveling? Jaime asked. Even if we were not fighting the Riverlands. I am still a wanted man. Yes, because of your stupidity you are still a wanted man at the moment, but that will be changing. News from King's Landing has King Robert missing. Everyone at the table reacted in surprise to the news, even Uncle Kevan. Well, everyone except Clegane, who could not seem to care less. His father must have received this news recently and had decided to sit on it. The king set sail for Dragonstone and never made it. That was over a week ago. Cersei is going to put Joffrey on the throne, and replace Ned Stark as the Hand of the King. Who will be the new Hand? Lord Diron Cerrit asked. I will be appointed the position, his father responded, as if the answer was obvious. The obvious answer for everyone but Lord Diron Cerrit apparently. Tyrion knew his sister had tried to get Robert to make their father Hand after Jon Arryn's death over a year ago. It made sense that if Robert truly was gone and Joffrey was to be king, then Tywin Lannister would take over as Hand once again. However, despite this, Edmure Tully and the Riverlands must pay for their slights, so I will not take up the position right away. Instead, my other son will go in my place. Normally Tyrion would think of the folly his father was following, in continuing this war against the Riverlands, especially now that the king was missing and Jaime was no longer going to be a wanted man, but the second part of that sentence had his full attention. He was going to be acting Hand of the King. If you believe that is wise, Father Tyrion said, bowing his head and hoping to hide the giddy look that was overtaking his face. Your sister is willful and thinks she is smarter than she really is. Despite everything else you lack, you at least have some brains. If nothing else, I know you will not let her bully you as she does others. Those words were the most praise Tyrion had ever heard his father heap upon him. Tyrion noticed Jaime had a frown on his face. It was clear his brother wanted to say something, but was holding his tongue. What about the force sent by Lord Stark? Sir Adam asked. Sir Mandan Moore of the King's Guard has been dispatched with orders for them to halt and return back to King's Landing. Given our strong defensive position, they will not attack us anytime soon and he will reach them before they do. Murmurs at their good fortunes left the mouths of most of those at the table. Their biggest threat had been the combining of the rivermen to their north with the 6,000 men sent by Ned Stark. With the men sent by Ned Stark being turned back around, that only left the rivermen, who they likely outnumbered 3 to 1. Sir Gregor and Sir Amory, you will each be given 500 cavalry. Avoid the army to the north and ride into the heart of the Riverlands and burn it. You will not have the men for the keeps, but the villages and farms will be yours for the taken. The two men grinned their sinister grins, and Tyrion felt his stomach churn at the thought of what they and their men would do to the Riverlands. The screams from the Tower of the Rush still rung in his ears. I will take the army up the God's Eye River. There is a bridge halfway up that will allow us to cross to the eastern shore. We will march to the King's Road before heading north and circling around on Harrenhal. We leave in 2 days' time. You are dismissed. The lords and knights all rose from their seats and left the tent. Tyrion saw that Jaime was staying, likely to talk about whatever he held inside in front of their father's men. He decided to stay too, to maybe offer his brother some support in whatever he wanted to discuss. Uncle Kevan stayed as well, and he gave both Jaime and Tyrion a smile as he looked them over. Their father gave neither of them a smile, Jaime because his temper and lack of thought had put them in this position, Tyrion because, well, because he was Tyrion. Is there a reason you stay? His father asked. If Robert is dead and Stark is being dismissed, I should go back to King's Landing, Jaime said. I am a member of the King's Guard. Uncle Kevan winced. Jaime, before he left for Dragonstone, King Robert let it be known to the realm you were no longer a member of his King's Guard. You were stripped of the title. Jaime's face paled at the news before he shook his head. Joffrey can just reinstate me. Do you think that will look good as the new king? To reinstate a member of the King's Guard who had attacked and grievously wounded the previous hand of the king, his father asked, eyes flashing. His gaze turned to Tyrion, who almost flinched as his father looked at him. You are to be the acting hand, what would you advise the king? Would you advise him to allow such a man back into his King's Guard? Tyrion now knew it had been a mistake to stay. He looked at Jaime, who was looking at him with an unreadable expression. With a sigh, Tyrion dropped his eyes to his lap. He would not allow himself to see how his words would affect his brother. No, I would advise him how unwise such a decision would be. Jon 6. It had been a little over 2 weeks since Robb had called the banners, and already their army was beginning to form outside of the walls of Winterfell. He did not raise them all, for many men were still needed for the last few harvests they would need before winter finally came. Many of those who did come were older men, greybeards who were veterans of Robert's rebellion and the Greyjoy one that had followed it. When winter came and food ran low, it would be the greybeards who marched out into the snows for a final hunt they would never return from. Many of them had decided if they were to die, better to do so before winter came. The blacksmith apprentice, a teen named Gendry, their father had sent from King's Landing, arrived shortly after the ravens had been sent. He was maybe a year younger than Jon and Robb, but he was taller than both and thick with muscle. The teen looked like someone Jon had seen before, but he could not quite place his finger on it. All he knew was that Mikken had been impressed with his skills, and said the remaining time of his apprenticeship would go quickly. The guards Jon currently trained would remain at Winterfell. Most of the guards would remain at Winterfell, with Robb deciding to only bring 50 of them with them on their march. Most of their family, including Robb's pregnant wife, were to be staying behind, and he wanted to make sure they were adequately defended. Even with 160 men being left behind to guard it, it still felt like too little. Though the worry seemed unneeded given all of the fighting was taking place hundreds of miles to the south. With his own journey now leading south, Jon would not be able to return to Castle Black like he had previously promised. Yet he could still keep his word and gift the boots and cloaks he had promised to his friends in the Night's Watch. The packages are for specific brothers, Jon explained to the merchant who would be traveling to Castle Black. The casks of ale are for the entire garrison. We'll see it done, said the merchant, referring to himself, his wife, and their wagon-pulling donkey. The merchant and his family who did small trade along the King's Road in the north were more than happy to receive 25 silver stags to deliver the goods to Samwell, Gren, Pyp, and Halder. John had written them a letter, apologizing that he would not be able to visit in person, but he hoped the gifts were still well received. He also hoped the Lord Commander would appreciate the ale he was sending as well, though that was from both himself and Robb. Robb wanted to show House Stark's appreciation toward the Night's Watch, on top of the 40 to 50 men whose families claimed were heading to take the Black. In his letter to the Lord Commander Mormont that was included with the ale, Robb asked for the man to verify that those men really had taken the Black so their families could be paid what was owed to them. Ladies Catelyn and Winifred would have to handle the paying of the families though. It was expected they would be long gone by the time the Lord Commander confirmed or denied the claims. Outriders had sent word that the banners of houses Hornwood and Bolton had been seen approaching in the east, while Glover and Mormont were seen to the west along the Wolf's Road. It would be another few days before all of them had gathered, along with the men from Lord Tallheart of Torrens Square. A week after that would be the Umbers and some of the mountain clans, and then another week until the Karstarks and the rest of the mountain clans came. "Jon, can I speak with you?" He turned to see Robb standing there, fidgeting. Jon gave his brother a curious look but nodded his head. Robb led him to their father's solar, where Theon already sat. Robb held the door open long enough for Grey Wind and Ghost to enter the room before closing the door. Jon took his usual seat and Robb his. The direwolves flocked over at their usual spots by the door. "We've received more news from Riverrun. They were unable to hold off the Lannister army coming down the river road, and it now marches on Riverrun. It will take months for us to get there," Jon reminded. "Aye. The waiting is the hard part," Robb agreed. "I have a new task for you." "Of course, anything." "Two tasks really. I want to reinforce Moat Cailin even more, and I do not want to wait the 2.5 months for our army to gather and march down there. You will lead the reinforcements." "Me?" Jon asked. "What about the training of the new guard?" "Horlis will handle that," Robb said with a dismissive wave. "Or at least he'll assign the more experienced guards to do it." "Scared to lead some men on a merry march?" Theon asked, his voice teasing. Jon scowled at the Greyjoy heir. "Just surprised, that's all. These men you lead will not be men, not really. They'll be boys, green boys younger than us with little to no training. Rather than have them be sacrificed in battle, I'd rather them guard the pass where hopefully they will be spared. Try to instill some discipline in them on their march. Steward Tallheart will handle their training once they arrive." Jon nodded his head. It was an odd request to be made of him, but he would do it if that was Robb's wish. "You said you had two tasks." "Yes. Accompanying you on this journey will be Sir Kyle Condon and Ronald Stout. Once you reach Moat Cailin, the three of you are to continue down the King's Road, past the Neck, and along the banks of the Green Fork. Everyone tells me there are two ways to cross into the Riverlands to get to Riverrun, at the Trident and at the Twins. I want you to see if there's a third. Shouldn't the Twins be enough? They're your uncle's vassals. My mother says Lord Walder Free is a prickly old man who will not commit to something unless victory is assured, and even then he will arrive after the battle is won. She does not think he will have answered Uncle Edmure's call, nor does she think he will let us cross without paying him off with favors." Jon had heard Lord Free called the late Lord Free by a few people, including Lady Catelyn and Sir Roderick whenever the man came up in conversation, but to disobey your liege lord like that was breaking an oath you swore. His father would never allow any of his bannermen to do so without repercussions, except maybe Howland Reed, but Jon knew the man held a special place in his father's heart. He wondered if the Tullys' weak position allowed their more powerful vassals to get away with things they should not, like refusing to answer when the banners were called. He knew in his lessons that the Tullys were given power over the Riverlands by Aegon the Conqueror, but nothing had been done to give the family more direct land to rule over and to call men from. Instead those lands and men remained in the hands of their vassals. His father said that both the Freys and Vances were stronger houses than Tully, and likely the Blackwoods and Brackens were too. Then another thought came to Jon. Sir Condon is a knight, would it not make more sense if he is the one in charge? Jon asked. Robb nodded his head, agreeing with Jon. Aye, he is an experienced man with much skill, but you are my brother. I want you to have the experience of leading men on a march and issuing orders. My legitimacy gives me respect that you will unfortunately have to earn if you are to be a commander in our army. A commander. John asked, surprised. Why so surprised? Rob asked with a laugh. You have received the same education I have. We are of age and I will be the one leading it. What about him? John jabbed a finger in Theon's direction. He will never be a commander. What? Theon asked, shocked. Why the hell not? You are a Greyjoy. No one from the north is going to listen to you. John is a bastard, but he is at least Eddard Stark's bastard. John gave Theon a smug look and it was Theon's turn to scowl at him. Rob shook his head at their immaturity. Sir Condon and Ronald Stout will be there for advice, but you are the one in charge. Then I will accept your tasks. Good, Rob said with a grin. Bring the reinforcements to Moat Cailin and then ride down to the Trident and back. With luck we will be moving through the Neck by the time we see each other again and you will have found another way across the Green Fork. Chapter 26